find that due to the state of emergency declared by the governor as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, in accordance with the governor's emergency order number 12, pursuant to Executive Order 2020-04, this public body is authorized to meet electronically. Please note that there is no physical location to observe and listen contemporaneously to this meeting, which was authorized pursuant to the governor's emergency order. However, in accordance with the emergency order, I'm confirming that we are utilizing Zoom for this electronic meeting. All members of the board have the ability to communicate contemporaneously during this meeting through this platform, and the public has access to contemporaneously listen. We previously gave notice to the public of the necessary information for accessing the meeting, including how to access the meeting using Zoom or telephonically. Instructions have also been provided on the website of the board at timberlane.net/Zoom-TRSB. If anybody has a problem, please call 382-6541, extension 3955. Please note that all votes that are taken during this meeting shall be done by roll call vote. Let's start the meeting by taking a roll call attendance. When each member states their presence, please also state whether there is anyone in the room with you during this meeting, which is required under the right to know law. Thank you.
Yeah.
Brian Boyle.
I am here. I am alone in the room. There are other members of the family in the household.
Lee Doobie is out. Kim Farah.
I'm here. I'm alone in the room. There are other members of the family in the household.
Barbara Kishka.
Present and alone in the residence.
Dana Lowe's.
Here, alone in the residence.
Sarah Mockemer, out. Sean O'Neill.
I'm here. I'm alone in my office, and there's other members of my household in the building.
Kristen Savage.
I'm here, and I have other members of my household within the house.
And Jennifer Silva.
I am here with other members of my household elsewhere in the house.
Dr. Cochran.
Hi. You need me to inform you that I'm at home and that if there's other members of the household in my house? So be it.
There you go.
And Jenna Horan.
I'm here, I'm alone in the room, and there are other members in my household.
Can't hear you, Kim.
Kim, you're on mute.
Sorry, my computer just froze and I'm trying to find the next item on the agenda, I assume, is the Pledge of Allegiance, correct?
Yes.
Correct.
Correct.
We all rise for the pledge, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. The next item on the agenda is everything just froze on me. Is the delegate session next on the agenda?
Approval of minutes.
Yes, Kim.
Approval of minutes. Okay, can we move on to the approval of minutes? Is there a motion to approve the minutes?
I motion to approve the minutes of the last meeting.
Thank you. Is there a second?
A second.
Okay. Could we take a roll call attendance on that, please?
Mr. Boyle.
Yes.
Dr. Farah.
Yes.
Mrs. Kishka.
Yes.
Ms. Lowe's.
Yes.
Mr. O'Neill.
Yes.
Mrs. Savage.
Abstaining.
Mrs. Silva.
Abstain.
Okay. Thank you. I did get my agenda back. Thank you very much. Moving on, before we move on to the student representative and then the delegates and individuals, I would like to formally introduce Dr. Brian Cochran as our new interim superintendent for SAU 55. He will be the interim superintendent till June 30th of 2021. As I alluded to at the previous meeting, the board has entered into a 2-year contract in the years 2021 to 2023 with Dr. Cochran, and he will be providing consultant services as an employee of the district for those subsequent 2 years. The board has felt that there is a need to have a senior management person extending through the next few years as we transition out of SAU 55, somebody who would be familiar with the operation in the central office. And this does not preclude the fact that we will have a search for a superintendent and an assistant superintendent as we move through the next upcoming academic year. Once we get school up and rolling, there will be a formal search committee put together to start the search for the new superintendent. So welcome, Dr. Cochran. If you'd like to say something, fine. If not, that's also fine.
Well, thank you. I just a few things. Basically, I'm very pleased to be here. I've been in the position for less than 2 weeks, but during that time, I've been able to meet with administration from all 3 levels of the schools. I've been impressed with the hard work and the inclusive and thoughtful approach of the staff, the teachers and administrators. The committee work has been outstanding. People have felt free, I think, to speak their mind and ask good questions and hear thoughtful answers. It's clear that we still have a lot of work to be done in terms of the reopening. But I'm confident that if we continue to work together, to ask the right questions, to seek the best information, and make the best decisions that we can for students, families, and personnel, that we'll be in pretty good shape. Really impressed with the quality of people, really impressed with their thoughtfulness. Their commitment to students absolutely struck me with each and every group of administrators. And that was pleasant and reassuring, and certainly makes me feel that I made a good decision to come to Timberlane at this time and SAU 55, and very pleased to be working with you all moving forward.
Very much. So now we will move on to our student representative, Jenna.
Yes, thank you. I would just like to begin by thanking the student representatives that have been on both the online task force and the in-person task forces. Nick Matthews, Grace Paradise, and Hannah Collins are on the remote learning task force, and myself, Maria Heim, and Lindsay Cornelius have been asked to be on the in-person task force. So I would just like to thank all of them for their incredibly hard work. I'd also like to thank the administrators and teachers, parents, everyone that has come to the meetings for the task forces, and especially the high school administrators who not only asked for us to share our opinions, but who actually listened to us, the students, and took into account what we said. That really meant a lot. And finally, I got the opportunity to speak with dozens of students this week as Maria Heim and I were trying to collect information regarding reopening schools and online school and such. And I was just overwhelmed by the sense of community that I felt speaking to the students and hearing that they would do basically anything to get to go back into a classroom and have some sort of normalcy in their life, and that it would involve teachers and administrators and students themselves working extra hard to keep everyone safe, to keep everyone happy, and to keep everyone's education alive. And I've just been overwhelmed by the fact that that's everyone's main priority here.
Great, thank you. And I do want to thank students that were on those committees, and also all the members from the community that helped serve on those task forces. I was on both of them myself, and there were a lot of people there, and it's taking a lot of time, and we will continue with those as we move forward. So we are moving on now to the delegates and individuals. I do want to make a few comments here. What we did was we requested that delegates and individuals submit a form to the district prior to the meeting. This way we could ensure that the person who is actually speaking is who they say they are, we hope. It's difficult to tell on Zoom. And the plan here for the next week is, tonight is a board meeting. On Tuesday, we are planning a Q&A with the public with regards to the proposed plan that has already been put out to the public and to the board. We are going to request that if people have questions, they should submit them in advance if you can. I think Ken Henderson, I'll turn it over to you in a second, is going to set up a means to do that. That doesn't preclude the fact that questions can be asked next Tuesday. We'll have the board and staff members that are available. And we will allow public to post questions that they will see, and then the board or the staff will try to answer them as best they can. If there are questions they can't answer next week, they will try to post like a Q&A afterwards to address those. I'm sure there are things that, even with the number of people that we have on these committees, that we haven't been able to determine all the questions that need to be answered. So that is the plan for next Tuesday. The board will not be voting on this plan until after we receive public input and have some sense of what the questions are that the public still has. So we'll be looking to move to this plan for a vote next Thursday. So Ken, could you explain how the public can send in questions in advance for next Tuesday's hearing? And before you do that, we are attempting to get an in-person meeting. I'm not sure if people are aware of it, but the PAC is undergoing construction right now. And though we could use the gym, and I didn't feel it was helpful to have the staff spend a lot of time that they would have to set up and clean the gym, and without knowing the number of participants that we might get, the PAC would be a more suitable place. So we are hopeful that next week on the 13th that we'll be able to get in the PAC, but that is the reason that we have not gone to a live meeting, because the SAU boardroom is not large enough. Okay, Ken.
Thanks, Kim. So yeah, what I'm thinking is we're just going to send out a form that we'll email to everyone in the district. We'll email it to staff, all the parents. We'll post it on all the websites. It'll be a simple form for you to fill out and submit a question. We'll ascertain the questions. Do you have a due date, Kim, on when we want to close that form to be ready for Tuesday?
I think I'll ask Sandy Allaire or the superintendent when you would like to close that, because you'll probably be parsing most of these questions out.
Dr. Cochran, did you have a preference for that?
Sorry, could you repeat the question?
When do we want the questions closed in terms of when people can submit them before meeting on Tuesday, so you have a time to review them and kind of
Tuesday, I would think Monday evening, 7 o'clock would be a convenient time. I know that the admin group will be working hard all day to try and make sure we have the most accurate and up-to-date information to all of those answers. If we're expecting a relatively high number, that should give us some time. If we're expecting a relatively lower number, we could close it, mid-morning. But recognize that the people who are doing the bulk of this work have been working way more than 40 hours a week, every week for quite a while now. And I think it's been a testament to their stamina. But I think given the time frame available, the fact that the plan is available for people now, I think it's reasonable that 7 o'clock Monday night would be sufficient time to give people the opportunity to ask questions.
Okay. And we will open the floor for questions on Tuesday, but this will give us some idea of the questions and possible ways that we can get answers to those questions.
Yeah, we'll put that form out early in the morning tomorrow, so be available to start filling out.
Okay, great. That being said, then I think we can move on, to delegates and individuals. We have 4 people that wanted to speak tonight. I'm going in the order in which I received the information. So the first person is Dennis Griffiths from Danville. Dean, I guess you'll be taking care of how to open that. Oh, here's Mr. Griffiths. If you could unmute yourself, I think then you'll be able to speak to the group.
Hi there, can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can, thank you.
Great, thank you. Okay, I've prepared my information here, because given that I only have 3 minutes, so if I go a little fast, please bear with me. So first of all, thank all of you very much for volunteering your time to be actively engaged in our educational system, and Thank you for the opportunity to speak. I have read the report that was delivered today, and I know you will be taking up that business later in the session. However, I do have several concerns, but one in particular that I will speak to now, and I hope to hear your feedback after my 3 minutes is up, or perhaps next week. I was unable to find any criteria that indicated a quote unquote finish line, so to speak. That is, I think we all need to know and understand what the metrics are to determine one flex option from the next. But most importantly, we need to know what needs to be the circumstances to close/finish the plan so we can get back to a regular routine. So please give some thought on that and inform us as soon as possible. Next, I would urge everyone, students, staff, faculty, administrators, school board, to follow the science in determining the steps to take, but to also learn from the anecdotal evidence found throughout this country and the world at large. I know it's rather easy to fall back on the most conservative point of view, but I implore the board to recognize and learn from all the mistakes that have been made by our leaders at the local, state, federal, and private levels. To be fair, they've done some things well, but for the most part, I think we can say that it's been a little bit of a cluster. I'd like to draw a comparison and provide some statistics and quotes directly from the CDC and Dr. Robert Redfield, respectively. Firstly, we know that more than 90% of all COVID-related deaths are from people 55 and older. These are highly vulnerable people. Further, we know that deaths of people age 5 through 24 count for less than 0%. We also know that of all the COVID-related deaths, only 6% of those did not have a comorbidity. My point here is that we should be focusing the majority of our attention on the smallest population of people when it comes to safety. Working with the teachers and other adults who are not in the who are in the vulnerable group should be a top priority. Focusing strategy on keeping the vulnerable most safe will allow us to be more effective and far more predictable. The comparison I'd like the board to consider here is the awful stats where over 50% of all COVID deaths were in states where the elderly facilities were completely mismanaged, which has resulted in so many premature deaths. Leaders made decisions and they were wrong and people died. Take the elderly care situation and place it right next to this decision. Whether the children are in school or sitting at home, isolated, depressed, not isolated and depressed. I'd like to quickly read a statement from Dr. Robert Redfield, CDC director, just last week. There's been another cost that we've seen, particularly in high schools. We're seeing, sadly, far greater suicides now than we are deaths from COVID. We're seeing far greater deaths from drug overdose, said Redfield. This doesn't even mention child abuse, other mental health scenarios, and collective sanity of the parental population. Finally, my point is that the cure, so to speak, of keeping the schools in limbo / flex plans in general, and having no end date will absolutely, indisputably hurt many children, possibly killing them in some indirect way. Those effects will likely be long lasting. Please don't repeat the same mistakes. This is your chance to make a decision that will affect lives forever. Don't just follow the sheep to slaughter. Thanks for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you very much. And we don't normally address questions or do back and forth during delegates just because of the business. I do agree with you on the criteria for opening and moving from one phase to another. Plan briefly addresses this on page 9. We are looking to state and local health officials. We will have metrics for this. We understand that parents need to know what triggers remote, what triggers school. So I do appreciate your comment on that and the rest of your comments. And we are still, this plan is still in progress in some sense as the data changes. So we will have those answers.
Thank you very much. The crux of my question, I think, maybe was lost, and I appreciate it's certainly around the points where we move from one metric to the next in determining on the flex plan. What I'm most concerned about, and I don't think you have the answer now. If you do, that's fine. If you don't, that's okay as well. Is has anybody thought about when this plan ends? Is there an end to it, right? Are we going to have a metric that says, hey, we can tear this plan up and go forward and put kids back in class? I know we have to listen to health people and all that, but has that been incorporated into the plan? Or has there been a thought? Because all I see is what we're going to do. I just see no end. And that gives me a lot of concern. And I'll end there. Thank you.
Okay, point taken. We will definitely be looking at that. Moving on, Maria Kendall is next.
Good evening. Hello. On behalf of the Timberlane Teachers Association, thank you, Dr. Farah and members of the Timberlane Regional School Board for allowing me a few minutes to talk tonight as the union president of the Timberlane Teachers Association. We acknowledge the hard work that's been put forth in the recent task force meetings. However, there are many more questions and answers, particularly as it relates to safety and procedures. We are at a pivotal moment of time right now in our school district, state, country, and world with the ongoing global pandemic of COVID-19. As a school district, you have a large decision to make that will impact the lives of our students, staff, community members, and families. I implore you, as you review the proposed plan for the reopening of the Timberlane Regional School District, that you think of safety first. Safety for our students and their families, safety for our staff and their families, safety for our community. All around the news this week, we are seeing cases of COVID-19 in schools that have reopened using the in-person models. New research about how students can contract and spread the coronavirus is also emerging, as is research on COVID-19, how it can spread in school buildings through the ventilation systems. We are at a pivotal moment in history. I urge you to do what is safest for our students, families, and staff, and not act on outside pressures. We want nothing more than to return to the school buildings to work with our students and colleagues when it is safe. However, we must do so safely. All the planning in the world will not prepare us for the social, emotional, and educational trauma that could occur through COVID being spread in our schools and communities. We must protect our students and staff and their families and communities from this. We must make smart decisions to meet the needs of all students, yet not be put into harm's way. While you listen to others tonight, ask yourself, is the risk worth it? Is the risk of your child, spouse, grandparent, aunt, uncle, brother, sister, friend, coworker getting COVID worth it? Let's do the right thing. Let's start remotely and slowly phase back into the buildings when we are certain we can do so safely. In the meantime, we will teach and instruct using an updated, revised, remote 2.0 learning model that will meet the needs of all students, providing them services and social emotional learning. Many school districts have made such heroic proposals and decisions, such as Hampstead, Dover, Nashua, because they have decided their students and teachers are worth protecting. They are not willing to put their students and staff through a living science experiment to see if they get COVID, and neither should we. Thank you for your time tonight.
Thank you. Moving on, Mr. Collins from Danville.
Can you hear me?
Thanks, Rob.
Great, thank you very much. I appreciate it. I did have the chance to take a look at the plan that was sent out earlier today, so I appreciate that getting out to parents before the meeting tonight and before it's presented to you. So thank you for the opportunity to speak to it. And I do realize that you're meeting later to discuss these issues and you have a public forum next week. So again, I appreciate that as well. I just like to echo that what the first gentleman said, that specific criteria to move between phases, I think is critical. He said it very well. I agree with the mask being required, but the one thing that concerns me is how do you dictate that? How do you require that without any consequences potentially for students or staff that may choose to not wear masks? And then, of course, the other thing is the the parents sending kids to school sick. I know that's difficult to police, but it's a huge concern of a lot of parents out here. And lastly, I'd just like to say, I read the section about the facilities and the HVAC, and it does mention that there are rooftop units that exchange air in each building, but that it doesn't speak to each classroom. So a gymnasium that has a rooftop unit that exchanges air doesn't help classrooms in the 86 wing at Danville Elementary that don't move air at all, that only heat through forced hot water. So that's a huge concern of mine. I'd also like to see and hope to hear that there was a third party that did an assessment of HVAC in the schools and in each classroom. I think it would be appropriate to inform parents of children that go into those classrooms exactly what the HVAC situation is if they ask for it. And the filtration, I would hope, is going to be a MERV 13 at least for all of the HVAC systems that we do have in the schools, as well as an alternative plan possibly to use HEPA filters in classrooms that don't have the ability to move air at all. I know there are many that don't move air at all. So when you have, as you know, 20 to 30 students and adults sitting in a room for an hour to 2 hours to 3 hours, breathing the same air without it being filtered at all, then you increase the risk of infection if there is someone there that may be asymptomatic. So that's all I have. I appreciate the time, and good luck with everything you need to decide and do tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Collins. The last person I have is Meg Borba. I think Kevin Borba is showing online. Could we bring that person up into the webinar?
You just left, Kim.
Okay, so I think we're all done then with the delegates and individuals that I was notified of. Okay then. So moving on then to the presentation of the school reopening plan. I will turn it over to Mrs. Allaire for this.
Hi, good evening, everyone. I'm in the process of sharing my screen with you all, so you can follow along with us. I believe Dr. Cochran was going to give us a general introduction, so I'll turn it over to him briefly. Dr. Cochran, were you planning to introduce, or we can get going right away if you would prefer?
Sorry.
Oh, that's okay.
The screen was moving on me as I was trying to unmute. Having been here in district in this position for only 2 weeks, we've worked hard on the plan, the balance of the plan, and where we're going. Some school districts have gone very, very cautious. Others have gone the other direction. And I think we've been trying to find a balance. And one of the parts of that balance is maintaining the quality of education. And I was struck by how often administrators referred to the need or the argument for, you know, this approach versus that approach based solely around the students, and not just the academic connection, but the personal connection. That's been a strong thread in those conversations. With respect to the planning, we've had, you know, tremendous risk mitigation strategies. How do we put those things in place? Where are we with busing? What are the options? You know, our intent is just to follow CDC guidance. We believe it's very important that parents have choice. Some parents feel very strongly one way, others feel strongly another way. But one thing I want to emphasize for you is the personnel aspect of the scenario that we're in. We have been in a teacher shortage nationally for multiple years. The latest estimate that I saw, which was in February of this year, was we're short about 250,000 certified teachers nationally. There are hundreds of thousands of people teaching with those certification because we don't have enough teachers. Now, that is a national issue, it's a regional issue, it's a state issue. people were struggling to fill positions this year, and hiring into August, there was a virtually no candidate pool. Now, the key to a quality education is quality teachers, supported by quality administrators. And in looking at the balance of this, that's really important. In order to maintain the quality of education, we need to be very careful to do everything we can to protect the health of teachers. Because if a teacher has to step out, we may literally have no one to replace that. And so the balance between health and safety and education is, in my opinion, very much hinged on making sure that we have safety for our teachers. So we're very cognizant of that. We want our teachers working with students as much as we can, as quickly as we can, but only when it's safe. Because if it's not safe for the adults in the building, the entire structure breaks down. It would affect class sizes, it would affect class availability. And so we have to do this in a way that we can maintain our personnel safe and healthy. And it means that we have to add extra layers of risk mitigation. But I really believe that it's the right thing to do, not only for those people personally, which I think is the right choice, but also to protect the quality and the continuity of the education that our children deserve. So.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Cochran. We've certainly appreciated your leadership and insight through the past several weeks of this process. So I wanted to first thank everyone for listening and tuning in, and kind of address the idea that what we are presenting tonight is a proposed plan that has been designed to integrate flexible options that we can move between throughout the year in conjunction with risk factors, with local community spread for the virus, but emphasize that our goal is and has always been to return to our school buildings. We recognize the importance of in-person education. We had people speak to this earlier. Our student representative, Jenna, spoke to the value of the students she spoke to of being in person in front of their teachers. The community nature of our school buildings is of primary importance to all of us. Our teachers, paraeducators, everyone who has been part of this process has emphasized that we want to be back in school. However, to Dr. Cochran's point, we have put this together in a way that does prioritize health and safety. And that has to be our primary goal at this point. So this is a proposal. Dr. Farah mentioned a little bit earlier that there is a plan to have a public forum and allow an opportunity for questions and answers relative to the plan. And then next Thursday, we plan to have a more definitive answer as to what our actual start to the year may look like. So that being said, I'm gonna move forward. Yep. There we go. So, excuse me. There we are. Our planning process began back in April with an extension, a group of our superintendent's leadership team actively looking into all areas of school operations that have been impacted by the closure of school. We've had a lot of time to reflect on our response to the closure of school buildings, which at the time we had to do rapidly in a crisis situation. So we as a school district have learned a great deal through our experience last spring from input from our community, from our staff regarding what went well, areas where we can improve and what did not work well, quite honestly. So we spent a lot of time reflecting on that, and our planning process has been purposeful in trying to address those areas that we knew that we had to improve on. So we purposefully wanted to bring in as much broad representation across our schools and community as possible. In July, we were able to bring on several representatives from different stakeholder groups for elementary and secondary subcommittees, as well as our 2 task forces. So we have one task force that has been meeting to focus on remote instruction, and we've dubbed that informally Remote 2.0. because that will look different than it did in the spring. And we are planning for options for synchronous learning. We'll speak more to that later in the presentation. We have another task force that has focused on the return to school buildings and looking at our facilities, looking at our classroom spaces, and getting really deep into detailed conversations regarding how we can make our buildings safe for a return to school for all staff and students. In those groups, we've had a great opportunity to actively engage in conversation. We've had people advocate for different perspectives, bring forward ideas, ask questions that were important for us to consider to help inform our decision making. Those groups allowed us to consider things from all angles in a respectful manner so that we are honoring diverse perspectives as we put together this plan. We also did send out a couple of weeks ago 2 thought exchanges. So we sent one out to our district staff as well as one with very similar questions. They're identical in most areas to parents and families to get some preliminary feedback and thoughts to allow them to ask questions. We had an extremely high level of participation in those exchanges. We've included the numbers on this presentation, but of our staff across the district, we had 548 staff members participate and share collectively over 1,200 thoughts. We also had over 2,200 parents and families participate in that exchange and share over 3,000 thoughts. We earlier this week sent out reports that contain the results of those exchanges so that our stakeholder groups can review what other people across our 4 towns and in our buildings are sharing, are concerned about. We've had an opportunity as an administrative team to dig into those results and to consider diverse perspectives, strong feelings, to look at questions that we know we need clarification on, but also to look at areas of agreement. So while we know there are strong feelings for either a full return to buildings or full remote learning, there are also multiple topics that people, regardless of their viewpoint on what we should do come August, that they agree upon. And we've been able to really capitalize on those areas of agreement to move forward and make some pretty good changes that I think will be well received by our community. So moving forward, we've included the mission of our district, but we wanted to come back to our mission, which is to engage all students in challenging and relevant learning opportunities. So in thinking about that, it is and was important in our planning process to think about how our plan, regardless of the instructional modality, will support us in engaging our students in active learning and providing challenging opportunities for them to grow in a personalized manner. So in our planning, we also talked about and considered the critical roles that our schools play in our 4 towns. Schools are essential to the infrastructure in our community. We know that they employ many people in our towns. They provide a safe, learning, secure environment for our students so that their parents may go to their jobs. We know that the impact of school closures last spring was significant in our towns for our students, for our staff, for our families. We heard a little earlier from some of our guest speakers that we need to be looking as well at the impact on mental health, social emotional health of all involved. We acknowledge that there is no single best solution. This is a very complex, challenging situation that we are navigating, but we commit to continuously prioritizing the health and safety of all members of our community. So we do remain committed to our mission, and to that goal, we have identified 3 different instructional delivery methods that will be used fluidly throughout the year. And we do recognize and have discussed in our task forces the idea of metrics, and we'll speak a little bit more to that later in the presentation. But those platforms include remote synchronous scheduled learning. That will be different from remote learning that we experienced in the spring, which was completely asynchronous. So there will be some significant changes with regard to remote learning this fall.
We have a blended learning model that integrates both remote learning with in-person learning on a rotating basis with reduced capacity cohorts of students who will attend school in person 2 days a week and will engage in remote learning the other 3 days. And finally, we have a model of a full return to school buildings with safety precautions, again, to maintain health and safety of all people. So the need for ongoing flexibility was something that has come up in all of our planning discussions. Early on in our planning with our subcommittees, we made a commitment to abide by the most current CDC guidelines that are published for guiding schools and school districts on a safe opening for all. We've committed to work closely with local and state health officials to monitor the level of local spread in our surrounding communities. We also acknowledge that we have staff members who live outside of our school district and travel to and from other communities in the state, as well as family members at home of our students who may do so as well. So for that reason, we developed a plan that will allow us to rapidly pivot our instructional model in conjunction with situations that may change rapidly. That being said, we also felt it was important, and this came out loud and clear in the parent thought exchange, that there was a request for options for families. So we have made every effort to integrate an option for families to choose an instructional model for their children. Right now, regardless of the district model that we are in, we intend to allow families to request 100% remote learning for their children for a predetermined length of time that will be identified by the school district. We intend to send out parent surveys. In fact, tomorrow, a preliminary survey will be sent out to families to gauge the percentage of families that may be looking to opt into either the remote model or a blended model. That will allow us to have more detailed data to inform our ability to go back to school in a blended capacity, or if we will in fact need to remain in a remote model. We also plan to reach out to our district staff to obtain information relative to staff who may be compromised or in a high-risk group relative to COVID-19 or live with someone who is in that category. So that is work in progress, and that data will help to inform us moving forward. So our return to school plan goal aligns to our mission that I spoke to earlier, is to ensure robust learning in all courses and content through effective instructional practices that reflect the delivery model at the time, while personalizing instruction to meet the needs of all students. Another aspect that I wanted to address is through special education. So we know through feedback that we experienced in the spring that the closure of school buildings has impacted our ability to deliver student services remotely. So we are actively planning opportunities to deliver services to students through special education in a manner that is both HIPAA, compliant with HIPAA guidelines, as well as IDEA. Our guiding principles for this return to school plan that you'll see as we move forward. Again, we are prioritizing the health and safety of all students. Decisions on returning to buildings must be predicated on data and based on health and safety guidelines. The voices of our stakeholder groups, including parents, students, and staff, need to be included in our consideration. And again, we want to emphasize the need for a fluid plan. Finally, we also want to acknowledge that while this plan was developed with an aim to incorporate layers of risk mitigation to protect our staff and students in buildings, we know that we need to work together as a community. And it is essential, equally essential, that our staff, parents, students, families in our community also implement risk mitigation strategies such as social distancing and mask wearing when appropriate when they're outside of our buildings. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Lucy Kanotis, who is our Director of Elementary Curriculum, and she's going to speak to our planning process and our instructional models.
Thank you, Sandy. Good evening. So the planning for the 2021 return to school has been intentionally conservative in order to prioritize safety and well-being for students and staff. Sandy mentioned we began this work back in the spring. with a steering committee of district level leaders who sit on the superintendent's leadership team. And we began a process of researching and gathering information about a safe return to school. Following the CDC health and safety guidelines, these members outlined considerations, their impact and unbudgeted impact costs, including but not limited to the areas you see bulleted here on this slide. After that, in early July, the TTA and TSSU appointed representatives to join us on the steering committee. From there, the group broke into elementary and secondary subgroups, adding building administrators, teachers, paraeducators, and school nurses to that group. The subcommittees reviewed the work of the steering committee and gave feedback and input to questions and considerations for each of these 3 phases or scenarios for instruction. Our task forces were formed in late July to address needs specific to changes for remote, as Sandy mentioned, a remote 2.0, which looks different from the remote instruction we experienced in the spring, and also the in-person delivery modes, both the blended and potentially full return at some point. Representatives of these task forces included building and district administrators, teachers, paraeducators, school nurses, local health officials, parents, and students. And I just want to reiterate the gratitude Sandy shared earlier for these individuals who engaged in productive and very important conversations to help us move forward with this plan. Thank you. So we have some considerations for each of these instructional models. Based on CDC guiding principles, Timberlane Regional School District has identified the category of risk of the COVID spread associated with each of our potential instructional models. We have a fully remote with potential for synchronous learning, which poses the lowest risk. Reduced capacity rotating cohort or a blended model where fewer individuals are in the building at one time and following mask wearing, social distancing. That increases our risk slightly, but a full return to school, even with restrictions, right now poses the highest risk. In the chart here, in the colored section, you will see some decision-making factors with regard to which phase or scenario of the plan we are in. I want to highlight that decisions to transition from one mode to another will be made in collaboration with local health officials, reviewing community data and adhering to CDC guidelines. As metrics are identified in our state by the Department of Health and Human Services, as well as the state epidemiologist, we will be referring to those metrics for guidance as well, but at this time, neither group has those created. We recognize the possibility of changing conditions across our community and or within buildings, and are prepared for a fluid movement between those models. So our remote learning as it relates to elementary level. Students will be provided a daily schedule. We heard loud and clear that a more structured day was requested, but not beginning school before 9 a.m. Each content course class will provide instruction as well as follow-up for practice and support. We know that we need to balance the time students are online with offline, but be available for students for more support moving forward with practice and also intervention. So where appropriate, teachers are encouraged to incorporate short and long-term projects in order for students to demonstrate competence and present learning through a more personalized choice. Students will engage in a morning meeting every day with their peers and their teachers. Additionally, core lessons will be delivered in both a synchronous and asynchronous manner, integrating content as much as possible. There will be dedicated time after each lesson to engage in some small group or independent work, both on and offline. And teachers will also be providing movement breaks, focusing on social emotional learning, and working to incorporate, as I said, more offline work and practice. As far as attendance, we will be taking daily attendance, which as always will be sent to the office, but we will also continue to track student participation and engagement so that staff can follow up with students and/or with families in any way necessary to maintain learning and engage all students in meaningful academic experience. I'm going to turn this over to Mr. Pedersen to speak to secondary remote learning.
Thank you, Ms. Kanotis. Good evening, all. So very similar to what Ms. Kanotis was speaking about at the elementary level. At the secondary level, we are going to have a lot of those same factors in play. So, you know, there will be a daily schedule. Students will be following their sort of normal schedule. We are planning on being on a rough 2-hour delay schedule though. So classes would be starting later in the day. But again, students are going to be following their scheduled classes in that AB rotation. So they are going to be expecting to go to class, if you will, every single day, every single period that they have it. You know, there is going to be that synchronous. We are expecting to have or hoping to have a synchronous portion of our class each day where students are connecting with the teachers. It might not be for the entire time, but at least a part of the time where they can be connecting with the teachers, getting some direct instruction, you know, maybe learning something new, seeing how a problem is solved, maybe watching a demo, something along those lines. Then there is going to be time for asynchronous learning as well. There's going to be time for students to work in that. The schedule of the day also allows us to build in some office hours and or extra help time within the contractual time. So teachers aren't expected to give up their afternoons, give up their personal time to be helping students with extra help or things that students might need help with. And as Ms. Kanota said, you know, attendance will be taken. So we're going to go back to be taking attendance daily and in every single class through PowerSchool. So families can, in the past, you know, the experience was families could sort of look at, you know, the attendance record, if you will, of students engaging in that. And so the plan is to go back to taking attendance through PowerSchool for each and every period. You know, this also allows us to put assignments back on the schedule where teachers feel it's most appropriate. So teachers could, you know, assign something one day and have, you know, something due the following day or, you know, the next day that class meets, and check in with students in that regard. So we're hopefully giving a little bit of flexibility and freedom back to the teachers in the way that they want to design their classroom in this regard, and make it the most effective that they can. So again, you're going to see a lot of differences from what happened in the spring because of those. The other thing I do want to mention in this is that, you know, there was a concern about the fact that we do have students, high school students, who are traveling to both Salem and Pinkerton for their career technical education programs, and we have been speaking with the administration in both of those buildings and really working out the plan for how can we continue with that. So we are focused on those students and ensuring that we can come up with ways. We have to kind of take every student individually and look at the program that they're in, which of those two schools they're going to, the transportation issues involved with it, the classes that they're then taking back at Timberlane. But we are taking that into account, and we are trying to ensure that those students still have access to those CTE programs at both of those schools, that we send to. So this next component is, I just want to highlight some of the components of the in-person component. So the first is that masks are going to be required. All students in the buildings are going to be expected to wear masks. You know, we will have extra masks available for students who don't have it, but the expectation is that all staff and students will be wearing masks as a mitigation component. So, you know, we are trying to mitigate this virus and mitigate the spread of it, and masks do help, and both students and staff wearing masks. I just want to highlight the one piece to that is that we do understand that wearing masks all day can get uncomfortable, especially in heat and humidity. So one thing that we discovered is that some other schools are really looking at that heat index and considering, if the heat index gets too high, having sort of a heat index day, if you will. If we were in school, but the heat index is just too high to be wearing masks all day, to then consider going remote for that day, similar to what we would do with blizzard bags in that regard. But it's something that we're looking into because we are cognizant of that as a health and safety component to wearing masks all day, having that breathing through the heat and humidity. So following along with that, we have personal hygiene. We are encouraging the hand washing, the sanitization. Gary and his crew has done amazing jobs at putting up hand sanitizers around the buildings, ensuring that the bathrooms are going to be clean. I'm going to let him speak to that in more detail later, but we are encouraging and and we're putting up signage to encourage kids to wash their hands and keep their hands clean, cough into their sleeves, things of that nature. We are following the CDC guidelines of 6-foot social distancing, where we can put those in place. We've looked at the classrooms and how can we spread out the desks and the maximum load of a classroom at 6-foot distancing. We've looked into the hallways to how can we have one-way hallways to reduce the traffic and congestion in hallways. We've mapped out our buildings in that regard. This next piece is the CDC does not recommend that schools do the screening. So this is really where, it takes a village to raise a child. And we are asking parents to do that in-home screening. There's more detail to it in the plan, and more detail will be coming to parents as we get closer to the start of school. But I do want to remind parents that you see your children a lot of hours of the day. And you getting them out the door in the morning is going to help us keep the other children, your own child safe, and the staff safe. So we are going to be asking you to screen your children for any and all illnesses, but especially COVID symptoms. And then finally, there's new procedures in place with the school nurses and what they are going to do when students become sick. So as I was speaking earlier, the at-home screening for illness, when you, the families, you, the parents, are helping us keep everyone safe. So as I said, the CDC does not currently recommend universal symptom screening in the schools, but the parents and the caregivers should strongly encourage to monitor signs of infectious illness every day. And not just COVID, but all infectious illnesses. Really keep kids home if they are sick, and staff, stay home if you're sick. We should not be sending anyone to school if they are sick. And this is really, I cannot stress this enough, that's probably, no matter what we do with masks and social distancing and things like that, the number one thing that we can do is just, if you are sick and have any signs and symptoms of any illness, stay home. It's probably the number one thing I can say for that.
Okay, so our third model is a blended learning model. Students will be grouped into 2 cohorts. Students at the elementary level will be assigned a grade level teacher, as they normally are, and that teacher will move from in-person to remote or remote to in-person with her class. We feel that it is very important to keep students with their teacher the full 5 days of school and not engage in sort of a half-day, half-time, part-time model, but rather that the students will have their teacher all day, Monday through Friday. So the cohort 1 would attend school in person on Monday, Tuesday, while remote Wednesday through Friday. Wednesday will be used as a day in our buildings for deep cleaning, as all students will be remote. Cohort 2 will be remote Monday through Wednesday, and then attend school on Thursday and Friday. Mr. Pedersen's going to speak to the secondary model in just a moment. I just wanted to point out that we are trying to follow a normal scheduled day in school, but a remote scheduled day, as we talked about earlier, whenever we are remote, so that at any point in time, should we be remote in a blended capacity or remote as a whole district, that the students are used to the same schedule of what that remote looks like. And when they attend school in person, they are used to the schedule of going to school each day.
Thank you, Lucy. So it looks similar, but there's some slight variations at the secondary level. We're still going to have 2 cohorts to, again, reduce the capacity in the building. And those cohorts will rotate through. Just like in elementary school, there's going to be a Monday, Tuesday cohort and a Thursday, Friday cohort. So, cohort 1 is going to be in school Monday and Tuesday, following their in-school A-day schedule, and then those kids would follow their B-day schedule on Tuesday. And the cohort 2 that would be in school Thursday, Friday, they are going to have the ability, and in some cases the need to log in remotely on those days during those times, and at least just check in. Maybe it's just going to be watching a quick lesson. Maybe it's going to be just checking in with the teacher, getting an assignment. But while cohort 1 is in school on an A day, cohort 2 is going to be logging in essence, in that same class, just remotely on that A day. And then the cohorts switch, with Wednesday again being a deep cleaning day, where the building would be vacant of students, so we can deeply clean the building in between the 2 groups of kids, in between the 2 cohorts. We are looking at different ideas for that day. One of the things that we're looking at is possibly an 8-period day, skinnies, if you will. All 8 periods, 45 minutes, so teachers get another opportunity to interact and meet with their students in a synchronous manner. And so it gives us one more opportunity to connect with kids. So teachers have a little bit of freedom and flexibility on that day as far as what they did, but it is going to be a remote day for all students. So in the last time that we came to the board, we showed you this decision tree, and the decision tree has not changed. It's just as we move through and things around us change, where we end on this decision tree changes. So, last time we felt as though we just didn't have, a lot of data. Lots of things have changed since then, and I believe Ms. Allaire is going to speak to that in a second. But, I just want to remind the board and everyone looking at home, watching at home, that this is a good decision tree that we can use to look at how do we get to help us make the decisions to ensure that safety, the health and safety of all individuals is paramount.
Thank you, Lucy and Mark. So as Mr. Pedersen just mentioned, since we last came to you 2 weeks ago, we have a significant amount of information that has increased and that is new. And so, we're coming with this plan without a solid recommendation, because we are still planning to collect data in the coming days, beginning tomorrow morning, regarding parents and families who may be in need of a full remote model for an extended period of time, as well as information relative to staffing needs and requirements based on their significant conditions that comply with a COVID Act that was passed federally. So, what you see here is a school calendar, the calendar that was approved just over a year ago for 2021. So on August 26th, currently, and the 26th, those are 2 professional development days that were previously approved by the school board prior to the first day of school. Currently, that Friday, there is no school scheduled in the calendar, and August 31st is currently the slated first day of school. Since we last came to you, we have become aware that the New Hampshire Department of Education, the commissioner, has allowed districts to implement 3 new professional development days that are state approved within the guidelines for minimum school guidelines for approval. of the calendar year, to increase those days with a specific goal to help prepare staff for effective teaching in a new model, whether it be hybrid or remote. So those days, again, are approved at the state level to go from 180 school days on the calendar year for school days to go to 177. So we are proposing this evening to adjust our school calendar to maintain our 2 professional development days that were previously approved, that's August 26th and 27th, but to increase our professional development days to take advantage of the state recommendation of those days and use the 31st, September 1st, and September 2nd as state approved professional development days. And then to consider September 3rd, which would be the 4th day of a 4-day week. That Friday and the following Monday, the 7th of September, were previously approved days off in the school calendar. So rather than starting school on the 3rd, we are proposing to extend an additional professional development day. The increase of those days specifically is to address a need, a request of our staff to have additional professional development around our new remote learning model. So as we've referenced multiple times through the presentation, remote learning this fall will look significantly different than it did in the spring. We did have the opportunity to provide some professional development in May and early June at the end of the last school year, but we've made many adjustments and changes throughout the summer regarding what that model will look like, how to best design instruction in a remote model. We need to be cognizant of recommendations regarding screen time for different ages of students that we teach. We need to train our teachers in opportunities to create small groups of students, to engage in small group instruction, to provide opportunities for students to collaborate remotely, and to have opportunities for our staff to plan appropriate instruction in this new model, whether it be blended or fully remote. To echo that need in our thought exchange that we sent to staff, 49% of staff who replied requested additional professional development around the new remote learning model. An additional 28% said that at this point, until they know exactly what the expectations will be, they are not sure if they need PD, but combined, that's a significant request from our staff that we want to honor and support. Again, our committee and task forces had detailed conversations around this, and many requests came out of those groups for our district to consider a delayed start of school to allow our buildings to adequately plan for this new model of instruction, especially if we are returning to school. There is a lot of work that needs to happen with regard to moving furniture around in classrooms, ensuring that desks and tables are spaced properly, ensuring that our teachers have a chance to set up their classrooms in a manner that is compliant with the health regulations. So we are coming to you tonight with this request and recommendation to move the first day of school to September 8th. It would be a new start of school date after that long weekend. It would provide opportunities for our staff to receive the training that they need. And at that point, we would have a significant amount of data regarding families who are requesting full remote instruction, as well as our staffing levels, staff who will need to be in a remote model themselves or may be able to return to the buildings. That data will allow us to make a more informed decision as to whether or not we need to start in a fully remote model, or if we are able to return to school buildings in a reduced capacity in our blended model. So once we send out those surveys tomorrow, we anticipate that leading up to the meeting next Thursday, we'll have preliminary data and a better sense of what model we may be able to start in on September 8th. But certainly this evening, we are recommending and requesting that the board consider that new start date of school. So from there, I am going to turn this over to Mr. Jeff Dowd and Sandy Hodgkins, who are going to speak to transportation.
Hi, this is Sandy. I don't know where Jeff is. He was supposed to help, but that's okay.
I can deliver it if you'd like.
Oh, go ahead.
I couldn't get off mute. I apologize. So transportation is looking very consistent with what had previously been presented. We are looking at limited bus capacity. Recommendations are approximately 13 students per bus. Drivers will be screened at the bus terminal daily before entering the bus, and we would also ask that parents screen their students before riding the bus. Our buses will be having enhanced cleaning procedures. Those will include the fact that our buses will be equipped with disinfected spray, which meets CDC guidelines. Drivers will use PPE, safety glasses, disposable masks, and gloves. They may not wear the disposable masks when they drive, but they will between stops and runs when there are students on the bus. After each bus run, the drivers will disinfect the buses with all surfaces being sprayed. Those are the seats, the seat tops, front and back, handrails, windows, and latches before the next run. So masks will be required. The students will wear masks when waiting for and at all times on the buses. Our drivers will not wear a mask while driving, as they may pose a safety hazard, may restrict their vision and ability to drive safely. Drivers will wear masks, as I said, when students are unloading and loading in a school zone. The bus boarding and loading and unloading procedures. So when our students are entering the bus, they'll enter the bus with a mask on and go directly to their assigned seat. Buses will be loaded from front to back, from back to front as much as possible. Our students will be assigned a seat, and siblings will sit together whenever possible. When we're unloading at the schools, the students will be directed by their driver to exit from front to back, and students will remain seated until it's their turn to exit the bus, with the seats in front of them being vacated first. Those are the procedures as we expect them to roll out, and I think it's important for our parents to review in our plan those guidelines which have been laid out so that we can all ensure safe practices while on the bus, while entering the bus, and while exiting the bus. So parents should be aware of what those processes and procedures are. And we will be asking any student who cannot follow those processes, those policies and our procedures to be aware that they may lose their bus privileges for not adhering. Our safety on the buses is very important to our students, to our drivers, and to our school environment.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Dowd. We're moving on to the section of the plan regarding facilities, sanitization, and cleaning. So I believe Gary is on this call and is going to speak to this section of the plan.
Yes, hi, Sandy, thank you. So we've been working all summer long on sanitizing the facilities, training on how to sanitize, how to clean the facilities. We've also been working on we're being trained on if there is a positive test for a student or staff, how to, disinfect, clean that area, and then open it back up to, students and staff again. We have taken a lot of effort to order and procure the chemicals for cleaning, our PPE, masks, face shields, gloves. We do have, as you can see in that top picture, we have electrostatic guns that we had purchased, I would say about 1.5 years ago. So we were ahead of game on that one, which was really good. We are also getting into ordering our signage, as you can see on that slide there. We're starting our one-way, I believe we're gonna be doing one-way hallways, 6-foot distancing. We're gonna be labeling hand sanitizer stations that are throughout the building now. Hallways, areas of entrance, exit, and that We're also taking into consideration, I know it's not mentioned in here, but water bubblers. A lot of the schools, most of the schools have bottle fillers. We're asking that the kids bring their own water bottles. We will be locking out the area of the water bubbler that you can drink out of. We don't want kids obviously walking up, taking a drink, the next kid coming in, taking a drink, but the bottle fillers are there. Those will be operational. Moving on, the storage space, that's going to be coming relatively quickly on whatever plan we go with. Obviously, we have to social distance in the classrooms, so we have to find storage for unused desks, unused furniture that may be in the classrooms. So we'll be getting, excuse me, getting rid of those as well. Moving on to, I know this is a hot topic with air handlers and the air movement. As you can see in the slide, we have air recovery units. We don't have your traditional residential unit. Our units take in 100% outside air and filter it into the building. It is filtered as it comes in. Any stale air or air exiting the building is exited to the atmosphere. It is not recycled in the building. It doesn't get introduced into the supply again. So that should take a lot of the worry about contaminated air. These units were designed years ago and they work very well. Our exchange rate, we have been working on that of our exchange rate in the classrooms, and we're exchanging the air. Certain classrooms are around 3 to 4 times an hour, and we can go to other classrooms and it's at 6 times an hour. So we are moving air in and out of every single classroom in every single building. We've been focused on that for about a month, taking readings, making sure that the air is moving, making sure these units are working properly. In conjunction with these units, we also have a building management system, which will alert us the instant something goes down, say a belt breaks or a fan breaks or something happens and it stops functioning the way it should. We are immediately notified with an email, and that we send a technician that we have in-house right out and they will rectify the situation. A lot of questions around how much air is actually moving. You know, we have a range of 1,500 to 3,500 cubic feet per minute. And, you know, we do have different size units throughout the district, and that's why we have that range. Our system was balanced, I believe it was 2002 in the district. So all these units have been balanced where the air coming in and the air going out in every classroom should be relatively the same. Depending on, and like I said, the size of the unit, they're gonna go from anywhere from 3 up to 6 times per hour. These units do have coils in them for hot water and to temper the air coming in the winter months. If we are running at 100% fresh air, we do have a damper on the outside that we can control with our BMS system, but it is recommended by the CDC that we take 100% fresh air and put it into these buildings. The CDC also recommends that we run these several hours before the buildings are occupied. My recommendation, coming from the National Air Filter Association and ASHERA, they also recommend that we run these 24/7. That is something I will be discussing with Jeff and a couple other admins. But these units are amazing. And just to go back to a point that was brought up at the beginning of the meeting about the filters, we currently run a MERV 8 filter, and going to a MERV 13, which is, they say recommended. That is recommended, from what I understand with all my research. It's recommended for air that is recycled. That is not recommended for air that comes in. These units, the greater the MERV rating, the less velocity of the air coming through them. So it actually slows the air exchange rate down. I understand there's a lot of discussion about that, and I'm sure we can answer those questions on Tuesday night if they have not been answered already. But that's about what I have for the air units as of right now.
Great. Moving on, the next section of our plan is with regard to our technology department. So I'm going to turn it over to Ken Henderson.
Thanks, Sandy. So some of the highlights from the technology portion of the proposed plan are that we are moving to a one-to-one dedicated device model. That would be pre-K through grade 12. And that also includes teachers, support staff, paras, custodians. The idea here is twofold. First, CDC is recommending reducing the amount of shared materials that are used in the schools, and devices are certainly very shared in most cases, at least in the elementary schools they were. But also from a remote learning or blended learning standpoint, having your own dedicated device enables you to bring it home to be able to use there for staff and students. I have to, if you've been in a task force with me, you've already heard my warning about the Chromebooks, and I'll make it known here as well. And that is, we did place orders for Chromebooks before the end of last year, back in May, I would believe that was. So the school board did supported the purchase of those, which was great. However, even with us purchasing those back then, the shipping delays are extreme with COVID. Coming from China equipment. So what's being explained to me is that not only are they not flying equipment over here and they're taking it by ship, but also during certain stops, they're quarantining the materials. So it may get to the United States and then have to be quarantined for X amount of weeks before it can be moved on to its next stop. So ETA on the new Chromebooks, right now I'm hearing, and this is just a rough guess, would be end of the month, maybe beginning of September. So there is a chance that we do not get those new Chromebooks in time for the start of next year. If that's the case, I want to ensure everybody that we will operate like we did last spring and get everybody a dedicated a device that needs it. I'm glad that we didn't collect devices at the end of last year and enable people to keep them for this year. I was kind of foreseeing, looking at the worst case scenario like this where we wouldn't be able to get equipment in on time. So we did enable students and staff to keep their devices for this, through the summer for the start of for next year or this coming year in the event that this happened. Some other things that are in the plan that we've been working on are some online applications improvements, and I got some examples that I can talk about. The first is the thought exchange from parents. We heard some feedback that in some cases students are using many different applications and having to log in with different usernames and passwords, and I can certainly sympathize with that. So we actually started a couple years ago with moving to an SSO provider, and that SSO stands for single sign-on. It's called Clever. If you have a student in the district, or certainly if you work in the district, you've heard of it. It's basically, think of it as a website that you log into, and then all the resources that we use can be, or most of them anyway, can be linked to that web portal, and you just click on the application you want to use, and you're automatically logged into that application. So you just log in that once, and you can get to those other applications seamlessly. So we're ramping up. We're putting more and more applications into that, and we're going to put as many as we can to help out with those, the multiple password issue that people are seeing in some cases. Some other examples of improvements we're making is at the high school, there's engineering and coding classes that some students take. We are setting up remote access into virtual machines that are powerful enough to run these programs that students need, where normally they would not have access to such at their house. So in a remote or blended learning situation, we're going to enable these students to remote into isolated virtual machines located at the high school to be able to use those programs. Some other things we talk about in the plan is we're really going to be ramping up the training resources available to teachers and parents. And that was something else we heard from the thought exchanges. We do have a lot of the commonly used applications, your Google Classroom, your PowerSchool. training that's out there, but some of the more less used applications, we're going to get some training resources out there for parents, students, and teachers where it's needed. We do have dedicated web portals on the website for them to access to be able to get to those resources, which kind of is a nice segue into my last bullet here, which is, communication is going to be paramount during these times. If we're in and out of different phases, or if things change day to day, we're going to have to keep everybody abreast of the current situation. We have many communication tools in the district. We have School Messenger for emails, texts, phone calls. We have the websites where we put the dedicated portals I spoke about. We have the Timberlane application that runs on an iPhone or Android, and we put a new section on a new section on that application called COVID-19 for COVID-19 resources. So just want to put in the plan there that we have many communication tools that we'll be utilizing as we go forward. So thank you.
Great, thank you, Ken. So while we don't have, in the return to school plan, there is not a section on athletics, because Mr. Fantasia has been working directly with the NHIAA regarding their response to COVID-19 and the resumption of athletics and summer workouts and team sports. So he is with us tonight, and he's going to present us with a general update on where we are at with athletics. So I'll turn it over to Mr. Fantasia.
Thank you, Sandy. Thank you to everyone. Can you hear me? Yeah? Okay. Sandy, can you go to that next slide, please? Thank you. So first and foremost, trying to keep things as close to business as usual. We have our online registration that remains open, and we have over 500 families that have registered for athletics so far. And that link can be found at the middle school and high school athletic web pages. And just so that people are aware, we have been tracking on a daily basis the people that register. I want to thank the school nurses at the high school and the middle school, because we have been sending emails out to families if they need a physical, if it's been expired, or if it will expire. Thank you to the guidance departments, because we have been communicating. As I said, we've been sending out emails on medical clearance and impact testing. Thank you to Access Sports for allowing people to take those tests at home. And I believe an email was going out today to any families who their children still needed to take the impact test. Just while I have everybody's attention, we will probably keep the registration open for about another couple of weeks, and then we will publicize that it will be closed, which will allow us time to do all of our eligibility checks one last time so that we can fill out the affidavits for the principals. So we will take care of that. I believe many people know, but just in case, the NHIA has moved the start date for fall sports to September 8th. That was done through the Executive Council. And the rationale really was to give schools more of an opportunity to focus on the school openings. Given what is going on, everybody's having these very same discussions. So we thank them for that. Next slide, Sandy. Also today, the Executive Council met and came up with what they call the first day of competitions for each sport. So September 8th is the first day that we can do tryouts and practices. But as you can see on this screen, depending on the sport, would be the day that you can actually compete. So golf and bass fishing can do competitions. Golf is such a quick season. So I believe they really felt like, you have to get as much in as you can in September. And thank you to Atkinson Country Club and all the golf courses that allow our kids to play throughout the state. And then you see on 9/18, you see other sports getting ready to start. And on 9/25 would be the first day that football would be able to start. So again, I have sent this information out to our coaches already. Our principals have this. Our admin team has it as well. So we'll be working with them very, very closely. So next slide. So I think I mentioned this before, but just so that people hear it again, the individual NHIA sport-specific committees, they continue to meet with the executive director to establish safety guidelines and protocols related to each sport. Once those guidelines are approved, and as a member of the sports medicine committee, I've had the opportunity to sit in to see what people have been producing. I have sent those guidelines and protocols, to our administration and to our coaches, and they can be found on the NHIA's website. So again, we're working with people and working as athletic directors to make sure that everybody is aware of any kind of guidelines and safety protocols that are coming out from each individual sport. I will guess there's not an exact date just yet, but I would guess in the coming weeks, the NHIA is going to send out what's called an agreement to join form. We had filled this form out, as had all other high schools, back in the spring with the intent of what sports you would participate in. Given the situation with the pandemic, the NHIA has decided to send that form out again and give districts an opportunity to make decisions as to what sports they would like to participate in. If they want to participate in all of them, you just check the box again. But they felt that it would be prudent to send that back out again. So that will be coming out, and that will require a superintendent, principal, and athletic director's signature. So obviously this is a district decision. Next slide. Basically right now, the athletic directors have been meeting across the state every week, sometimes more, since last spring. We've got a pretty set schedule, and we just met again this week. So basically, with the knowledge that we have now of when the start date will be, and more importantly, when games will be able to be played, we're going to go back as athletic directors and look at different options for scheduling. There's discussions right now about creating more of a regionalized schedule, schools that are in closer proximity to each other whenever possible. Obviously, the season will be shortened just because of the start date. But there's other issues too that we'll have to deal with there. And the NHIA is also talking about having open tournaments. You never know what's going to happen. We may be shut down for a little bit. Other schools may be shut down for a little bit. The main goal here is to have kids out and active and getting back with their friends and socializing and representing their schools. So the idea of an open tournament really takes the pressure off of how many games did you play, who did you play, and really just gives the kids a chance to get back, into what they want to do. Next slide. So as we move forward, and I've been working a little bit now with coaches and with administrators, and we are going to continue to do the work. But much like the conversations are happening about school, they're happening also about athletics. We also have to abide by the NHIAA's sports medicine committee's recommendations on safety, which also come from the CDC. They come from the National Federation of High Schools. They come from the New Hampshire Governor's Commission. So we will be working on protocols to have daily screenings of coaches, officials, student athletes, et cetera, any kind of game help. There's discussions, obviously, at all schools about, spectators, and do we allow them? Do we not? Do we limit them? Transportation, as I just saw a screen a few minutes ago, that's going to be an issue. Transporting kids, and all schools are having the same discussion. We're going to have to work around that stuff. We're going to have to get creative. And also with facility usage, locker room situations, the athletic wing, the thin hallways, the proximity of the athletic trainer's room. So we'll be doing a lot of work. We will continue to do a lot of work, and we'll work with the principals and the superintendent and the admin team to come up with our procedures and protocols and make sure that everybody is understanding of them. I will tell you that we have had the ability to do very limited, but having to do some outside summer workouts with some teams on a limited basis. And I have to applaud the coaches and the kids for the way they have handled our procedures. Everybody has done just a great job. Kids come into the area. It's outside only. And just to give you an example, and they pull up in their cars and they stay in their cars with their masks on, temperatures are checked, screening questions are asked. They bring all of their materials. They bring their water, they bring their mask, they bring their sanitizer, and everything gets put in a set place on the field, 6 feet apart from everybody else. And I will say it's something that basically we do understand that the kids and the coaches and myself and this whole community understands that, you know, this is a serious issue. There is a new norm, as we like to tell our kids, but they understand it, and it's worked out, and we're seeing kids out on the fields, you know, safely, just trying to get in shape and exercise. And I also want to thank Gary Paradis and his grounds crew as well. Everybody has just pulled together very, very well. So I think that's the last slide, Sandy. I'm not sure.
It is the last slide.
All right. Well,
Yeah,
and again, I
thank
just
you.
want to thank everybody because people have been great. There's a lot more work to do, and I want to thank my fellow athletic directors because we're all bouncing ideas off each other and trying to see what we can do to help these kids. So thank you.
Great. Thank you, Angelo. So that concludes the presentation. So I'll turn it back to Dr. Farah.
Thank you very much, and I thank everybody who presented and the enormous amount of work that has gone into the plan and also the presentation. I think that was excellent. So you're looking, the board is not going to vote on the plan tonight, but we are looking to vote to take action on a September 8th start date, which I think is important so that parents will be aware of that. That is not to say that we will be remote on September 8th, which I think is in contrast to what we spoke about last time, right, Mrs. Allaire? We may potentially be going back in some shape or form, depending on what students we're looking at, either as a cohort of A and B, or it's possible if there are enough parents that are committing to online that students could actually return to schools as one large cohort, if we could manage that and follow the CDC guidelines, correct?
Correct, but right, we'll need to have increased data to be able to look at our capacity, to be able to return in a blended model or full capacity if possible, but that's really going to be dependent upon the percentage of families who opt into the 100% remote model. So once we have that data, we'll be able to make a decision as to whether or not we can accommodate the blended capacity or full remote.
And if somebody chooses to go 100% remote, they essentially, for lack of a better way to put this, will have the same education opportunity as somebody who's in the blended or the face-to-face, correct? I think it was a little unclear for some people. You're 100% remote.
Yes, that is
Okay.
the goal. I mean, there's a tremendous amount of planning that is associated with that. So, you know, once we become aware of the families that are requesting that, their grade levels at the high school level where we have AP classes and electives, that scheduling is quite complex, but that cannot start taking place to see how we can accommodate all of those requests until we have the specifics around the families that are requesting that. But you know, our goal is to take all requests into consideration and to provide the best optimal educational model for all of those people.
Okay, thank you. So I'll open the board to questions. Sheila, I see your hand.
My question is this, Kim, you're putting out a questionnaire for the parents, but what about the board? Should we send you our lists of questions? Because I've got that many front and back from, you know, things that have come up that when I looked at the plan that, you know, led me to another question, which I'm sure is going to be probably double what the parents are asking in some aspects. So how did you want to handle that?
Well, let's do this. I think, to be fair, we'll be having another meeting on this, and I'm just looking at the rest of the agenda here. Let's open up questions for the board here. I will shut them down maybe by 9:15 so that we can move on. We do need to go into a non-public, and I would anticipate that we may have to be in quite a lengthy non-public this evening. So That's what I want to do. Let's see how far we get here. Do want to rotate among boards members for questions so that everybody gets at least a chance. If you do have other questions that we don't get to tonight, if you forward them to me, then I can forward them to Mrs. Allaire or Dr. Cochran to see who, and they can work on getting those answers for our public hearing or for the board, depending on what the question is, for Tuesday or for next Thursday, should they be more just pertinent to the board. So is that, I think that's reasonable. This way we can get through the meeting and still have time. I know the board has just gotten this plan, so we need some time to digest it and sleep on it too, but there's certainly initial questions. So Sheila, why don't you ask a question or two and then I'll open it up to another board member.
I guess what I'm looking for, the first thing I am looking for, that is if we find, you know, God forbid, we have a COVID case in the high school. I'd like to see exactly what, and I know we're going to say we're going to go by CDC guidelines, but I want to see exactly what Timberlane Regional School District, how we are going to handle that. As far as, you know, my worst nightmare is the high school because we'll be switching classes and that one person could be around, I don't know how many. And I'd like to see something put out on what exactly the protocol will be if that happens. Doesn't have to be tonight, in the future, but I would like to see that.
May I quickly just address that? So absolutely, we understand where you're coming from and certainly hope to provide more specifics to that. Our school nurses are working collaboratively right now as a district team to prepare those protocols. So to your question that you just asked, we don't have that available this evening to share with you.
I know you would.
Yeah, but they're actively working as a group and communicating with local health officials as well, in conjunction with the CDC guidelines. So that is actively working on that.
That's a biggie for me.
Yep, absolutely.
My other one was, and this is, like I said, this is just me making notes as I'm reading. I saw the high school was 9:20 to 2:20, middle school was 9:30 to 2:10. However, the elementary school day starts at 9, but I didn't see an end time. All I saw was a 9. So I think it might be a good thing to let the parents know what their day might be like if they do choose to go remote, because, you know, they need to plan out what their lives are going to be also. And this is very open-ended. And I think there needs to be some parameters like you have at the high school and the middle school so that, you know, parents know what they're getting into if they choose remote. That makes sense? Those are only two I'm going to ask right now, Kim, because I don't want to hoard it.
Okay, thanks.
Would you like me to respond to the elementary?
Sure, Lucy, go ahead.
Sure, okay. Yes, absolutely, and we're working on that. I think the difference with our elementary kiddos, so we have heard loud and clear from parents that they do not want us to start on a 2-hour delay because that's 10:20 and too late in the day, as well as not starting as early as 8:20 for our younger students. So that 9 o'clock time was a time that came out community-wise as an appropriate start time. So what we're working on right now is a schedule that can be crafted. We're looking at, you know, 4 major checkpoints, I guess, for lack of a better word, where we have a quick lesson, social emotional morning meeting, and then we have math, reading, and writing. And so buildings are working right now to look at how those schedules could play out, also still providing a UA, but trying not to extend the day to 3 o'clock because parents have asked for it to end earlier than 3. So we are working on that end time. and still collecting feedback on what comfort level of families is.
That's great, but that's the one thing that stuck out to me is that the middle school and the high school had a beginning and end, the elementary did not. And these parents are trying to make good decisions for their families based on what's going to be happening.
Totally agree. And I do expect we should have that in the next week, at least a good frame for you.
Okay. It's just that it's going to be hard for people to make decisions. It's not just, do I want my child in the atmosphere of being in school? It's also so many other things that goes in with the parent's day if they can do this. So the more information, and you're surveying them and they really don't have all that information to be able to make a good decision. That's all.
Thank you.
Other board questions? Barbara?
So first an observation, the September 8th start date caught me a bit by surprise, the request for that, because we'd been saying August 31st. The two questions I have, one is, can you explain the reasoning behind asking pre-K and first grade to be wearing a mask all the time?
So I think Dr. Cochran mentioned earlier, our plan is ever evolving, and because we're sticking with CDC guidelines right now, there has been some concern that other than Central, those students are entering the same building as in the neighborhood schools as other grade levels. That is one piece that we are digging into along with our health officials a little bit more deeply into thinking about, you know, if, and if so where, we blur that guidance a little bit and still able to maintain safety. So at this point, we are saying that all staff, all students in all areas, but we are continuing conversations around our youngest students.
Okay. And of course, oh, sorry, Mr. Cochran.
Just a quick response. That's one of the more controversial areas. A lot of people are putting a lot of stock in the fact that there's very few students who are being identified in the younger age groups, in the K-2 age group. However, there's a fair amount of evidence that they can be COVID carriers and be asymptomatic. So if you think of young children who are you know, showing no symptoms, if we allow them to not have masks on, and for some of them it's going to be difficult, then you're still looking at them as significant carriers. And if they get teachers infected, get paras infected, then that impacts the education that way. So it's probably one of the things that we've talked about the most for exactly the reasons you just described. And we decided that we would recommend, you know, the safer of the two options. There are some schools that are not requiring it for K through 2. One of the difficulties is students that age cannot self-control as much as we would like, and you're going to have very intense contact. And so you could be in a situation where there's no risk mitigation because it's, you know, person-to-person contact. What do you do in the playground? You know, do you lock up the equipment because kids are going to have hands all over it? So to some extent, it sounds easy in that by and large there's been nothing serious happening to that group, but lots of serious things can happen from that group as asymptomatic carriers. And that is one of the more difficult situations. They want to see their friends, they want to play, they want to learn, they want to do all those things. They're not going to want to have masks on, most of them. And so I think we're better off starting in the safer mode and trying to make that work and then see what happens. And I think that's pretty much where our larger groups were, not just administration, but the parents, the teachers, the paras, for multiple reasons, but a lot of it was aligned with what I just described in terms of the carrier piece.
All right, thank you. And just one question for Mr. Henderson, and it's nice to finally see you. I have never seen you. when we have so many teachers doing synchronous learning, and presumably includes video, do we have the facilities, do we have the capability to have all those teachers streaming at once?
From within the school?
From wherever they are. Some are going to be at home, I guess, and some are going to be at the school, yeah.
Well, I can speak to, you know, if they were, you know, at school, we certainly have the bandwidth to support all that and the Wi-Fi, and I'm not concerned about any bottlenecks there with our technology in the schools. In their houses, that it's been rare, but I had heard of cases where, you know, teachers didn't have the bandwidth sufficient. They've had issues. Maybe their Wi-Fi at home hasn't been the best and they've been spotty. So I have, if they've reached out to me, I've made technical recommendations on ways they can improve that at their house.
Yeah, that's great news. Thank you.
Yep.
Great. Sean, then Jen.
Sorry about that.
Okay.
I got a question in regards to, and I don't need an answer right now, but it's something that I think can be brought back to the table next time, is when we were talking about busing, there was no mention relative to SPED students and SPED busing schedules and so forth, and what kind of accommodations are going to be made for them. So I just think that topic needs to be touched upon and give us a proposal. The other question I have is you know, the mask mandate for in-school, you know, learning. If the distancing between students is going to be 6 feet or greater, can the mask mandate be relinquished such that people can take their masks off?
We don't need to answer that question now. It's a valid question. That'll go back to the committees. Those task force are meeting next week.
Yeah.
I mean, the concern with taking the masks off, I know even at 6 feet apart, is that you still, in a classroom, you still have, you know, the air is only circulating so fast. So I understand what you're saying now, because anyway, good point. I think it needs to be discussed. Anything else, Sean? Should I move on to Jen?
Just my last one is going to be is for the students that do in the classroom learning, and if an event happens such that we have to move to all remote, is that part of the plan for the in the room teachers? Are they the ones that are going to be having plans to basically, you know, in an ideal situation, and the best embodiment would be that the next day you're all remote and you don't miss a beat? That is the perfect scenario. How do we get to that perfect scenario? And I know that there's going to be hiccups along the way, but that should be the goal and not the, you know, what we want. I mean,
Yeah,
exactly.
Mr. O'Neill, that is the goal of the plan. And, you know, by design, that's the way we've planned it, so that we're designing remote instruction alongside our design for a potential return to school buildings, whether in reduced capacity or full capacity, with precautions in place. But the idea is that, you know, we know that something could happen that would cause us to very quickly, as we did last spring, leave one afternoon and you know, have to return to a remote model. So you know, the fluid nature of the plan is really designed to address exactly what you're speaking to. So yes, and that speaks to the need for the additional professional development to be able to support teachers in designing instruction for two completely different instructional models. So designing for remote instructional lessons in a synchronous manner, that, you know, in remote instruction does not imply 100% online learning where you're just in front of a screen the entire time that your class would be in session. There are different approaches that are instructionally better for students, and considerations around screen time have to be taken into account. Movement, physical breaks, all of those things have to be built into it. And it's a very different approach for our teachers and our paraeducators from what they would do if they're in buildings.
So that professional development will ideally support our educators in both of those models. And I'll turn it, Dr. Cochran had something to add too.
I just had to comment on the original question. We have had some general conversations about can we differentiate if we have enough information about potential incidents. So you have two things. You have a potential case of COVID, let's say it's in a student, and you have a confirmed case of COVID. So what happens if we have a student who's driven to school by their parents, gone into a class, and we absolutely know that the only people that that person exposed were classmates in their class, because we're working with a model of risk mitigation that keeps kids together. So I mean, lunches are together. Middle school, we're going to be moving teachers instead of students. So instead of students having to swap into new desks where another student was. So if we layer those risk mitigation strategies and we can determine the level of exposure, then the question becomes, can we make an informed decision about limiting the number of students who have to move remote? Does that make sense? And what we need to do is determine whether or not those are decisions that we can make by working with the healthcare professionals. If it's a significant exposure and we have no idea, let's say we find out at the end of the day, we may still be able to say, we know the group of students and adults that the exposure is limited to. Can we ethically and safely pull that group out and move them remote? That's one of the questions that we're working on. And what would that guidance look like? We had situations in Barnstead in the spring, and what we found was that a potential case that was found during the day, we're able to get a hold of Department of Health and Human Services, get their specific advice from the person who does this professionally, as opposed to me. I do have 2 epidemiology classes from back in the 70s, but that's not going to help us a whole lot. In the absence of that clarity, I think we have to err on the side of excluding more kids and moving them remote. But we really want to find out what our capacity is going to be, so that if we do have a suspected case, then we're able to impact fewer students and maintain that safety cushion that we're looking for. We don't know where we'll be with this by the time school opens, but it's one of the things that we have talked about.
If I could just add also, I think, Mr. O'Neill, that's one of the benefits to the blended, because teachers are preparing each week for both models within that week, so that at the drop of a hat, we can transition. Maybe we do 2 days away lesson, but we have something prepared and we're ongoing.
Exactly, contingency plans.
Yeah.
And in the spring, when we made the transition, it was difficult because most of the Chromebooks in some schools were in the classroom. In this case, students are going to have their Chromebooks all the time, so you don't have the issues of deploying Chromebooks and making sure, that sort of thing. The other things that we're going to do is with risk mitigation is we've had conversations about what happens with lockers. Lockers are dirt magnets. Lockers are student congregation magnets. And so we've had conversations about not allowing lockers and how does that happen. So, these are the sort of strategies that we're trying to layer that will allow us to put us in the best position possible. But when it comes to an actual decision about what portion of a school can we safely say, we don't know any way that these 70% of the students in the building were not, we know for sure that they were not exposed based on the source that we're identifying. Is it reasonable for a decision to be made, and who would make that decision? Does that make sense?
Thank you. Let's see, Jen.
Thank you, and I'm going to apologize in advance because my internet has been terrible today. So if I'm cutting out, just let me know and I'll stop. But I just a couple comments and questions. One, Mr. Fantasia, thank you for recognizing the kids that are out there, how understanding they've been, and the fact that they are taking precautions. I think the kids really are willing to do whatever they need to do to get back into the classroom, and their education is really important to them. And also, um, the earlier comment, I really appreciated recognizing the parents' concerns they had, that were expressed in the spring about remote learning and how that's going to look differently. As far as the start date for September 8th, I think that looks good, but I am a little bit concerned about not being able to allow parents to plan. I think parents really are looking to understand, what is that start going to look like? Originally, it was looking like a 2-week start remote until September 14th. And now, I don't know if that's still going to be remote. I know our community cases within our district are very, very low. Atkinson for the past few weeks has been 0 cases in the community. I don't know why we wouldn't be looking to bring the kids in as a hybrid model, and why we couldn't commit to that, fully understanding that if situation changes in the community, that of course that could be looked at again. And then my other question, I heard that there's been a lot of people looking at, where can we achieve the 6-foot distance? And I'm just curious, how many opportunities do we have in our district where we could actually be successful with that?
I do know that we've had conversations about that. One of the first things that staff did was measure all of the classrooms, looked at average class sizes, and literally room by room, school by school, determined with the use of desks versus use of tables, whether or not we could get the social distancing piece. And to some extent, it becomes a math problem in terms of can we do a hybrid. So let me throw out the scenario that we might be looking at. Let's say 10% of parents choose to put their kids in fully remote and keep them there. That's 90% of the kids left in a school. On a split model, that's 45% of the students, assuming everything splits evenly, and it won't. If those are the numbers we're looking at, that makes it difficult to bring 45% of the kids back. If closer to 30% of the parents hold their students out, then your 2 shifts are 35% of students. We're very comfortable, I think, with saying that we can accommodate that level of student population in the building at 6-foot social distancing. So there was a lot of agreement, a lot of heads nodding when we talked about those sorts of numbers, but it really depends on what happens with how many parents decide that they would rather have their kids in remote, err on the side of caution for their health. So that becomes one of the factors. One of the other factors is, what happens if we have teachers or paras who are immune compromised and are eligible under federal law or the Family First Coronavirus Act to withdraw from teaching, in which case we're down a teacher. So what does that do? So those are the 2 things. So the survey is going out to get hopefully tomorrow, to get an initial read from parents, and we felt we should hold off until they have what we prepared tonight for the model. And then there'll be in the not too distant future after that, if it looks like we can pull off the hybrid model because we'll have enough parents having kids in fully remote, then we'll ask them to actually commit to something. So we'll know the student, the grade, the family members, all of that piece. So that's structurally where we're at. If we had no kids going remote, I question whether we could hit the CDC requirements. My best guess would be, and I'll defer to the people who were here at the start of this, the work that was done, Sandy and Lucy and Mark and others. I think my read of the situation was people did not think that we could bring back 2 cohorts and successfully meet CDC requirements.
That's a fair statement.
So that's what went into the thinking.
Yep.
So I don't think you're going to get anywhere near 30% of the parents saying that they want 100% remote. I could be wrong. I will be I will be shocked if there are 20% of the parents that say they want 100% remote. But looking at, our schools being microcosms of our communities and looking at our community infection rate, at what point do we say we feel that we can go back in a hybrid model? And if the answer is we have no cases, then if we have no cases, would we not go back to full in-person model? I guess I'm just really struggling to understand where the line is and in that decision making.
One of the things that we've talked about is the fact that, that I've shared with people, is the fact that other parts of the country are going back sooner than us. Midwest, second week of August, Southwest, similar, Deep South, are sometimes back the first week of August. So there will be similar models being implemented in communities, and you're going to see very different things happen. And it, as you suggest, it's going to be impacted by what's the level, the community level of COVID. So we could hear that somebody's doing exact same thing we are and say, oh my God, the building blew up. Okay, but that's probably because the community blew up. Yes. So what we need is a model to see evidence of what's happening earlier than we're opening in the model that we're using in a community that has the same sort of demographics and COVID profile that we have. So we're making a good comparison. I mean, if things start blowing up in communities with a hybrid model before we're even started, then we would have to rethink, as long as it's a truly comparable school district and community with respect to known COVID profile. Does that make sense?
It does, but it still goes, I'm still feeling like parents are looking to be able to plan for something. And I understand that that can change at the drop of a hat, and we all have to be prepared for that to change. But I don't feel as though our specific Timberlane community infection rate is so bad that it supports full remote at the start of the year. I mean,
we're not talking about full remote at the start of the year, Jen.
But we're talking about not letting parents know.
No, we're not talking about that right now. And Mrs. Lair, correct me if I'm wrong, Dr. Cochran. What we're talking about right now is a September 8th start date. There will be a cohort of students that will have chosen by that point to be 100% online. They will be supported by remote teachers who, for whatever reason, can't or are not able to be in person. Then, depending on how many students we have remaining, we will do this A/B switch to ensure that we meet the CDC guidelines of 6 feet apart and so on and so forth, regardless of what the community transmission rate is. We are still adhering to what they're recommending, even if it's 0. If we find that we can adhere to that with all the students that want to be in the buildings, then all the students will go into the buildings. So right now we are talking about on September 8th, that students that want to be in school, at least half that cohort will be in school and potentially the whole cohort, but we can't make that determination until we know the percentage of students that want to stay online. Sandy, is that correct? That's what we're proposing right now.
So the original plan was we need to get better. In this model, kids are either fully remote or remote 30 or 60% of the time, either Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, or Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. So let's spend 8 days, 10 days, and work on getting remote. Once the State Board of Education said they would approve the 3 extra PD days, that was a little bit of a game changer. And the other thing that happened was actually a conversation with high school administration. And what they expressed was that they had kids who really drifted away from school in the spring. Students who weren't especially connected to the school and really stopped engaging. And they were very concerned that if we went the first 10 instructional days online and those kids drifted away, that they would never get them back. And so their suggestion was get the kids back all the kids on you know, that first week of school, we need to connect with them. We need to get them set up for success. We need to show them that it's a different situation from the spring. But we're concerned about that at-risk population, and we want to do everything that we can. We'd rather push in the 5 days of PD and then have that break for teachers over the long weekend so they have time to both spend with their families and work on some things, and not let those kids disappear and not show. And to me, that was a pretty significant argument for saying, despite the benefit of the extra time where everybody's doing remote so they can get better at it, we can get much of that benefit from the PD and have kids having contact with each other and with their teachers starting day one, or in some cases, day 3 of school.
So when will parents know? Because this is sounding very different than what parents heard last week.
Right now, we're sending a survey out hopefully tomorrow to the teachers and all employees about, you know, potential. We have to be very aware of HIPAA concerns and other things. We're trying to find out which people have documented medical situations that they or somebody that they live with would have that would mean that they would not be safe working with children face-to-face in the building. Then that gives us a pool of potential people, as Dr. Farah pulled out, who make good candidates for teaching fully remote. So once we have that, and we have this similar set of students whose parents wants them to go fully online. So there'll be 2 processes. One, we'll poll the parents, and it will be anonymous, but we'll get an idea of what that actual percentage is, at least from the group that's reporting. And then we'll know where we are. And if the number comes back at 10%, then we're in a very different problem solving piece than if it comes back 30%. If it comes back at, I would say, 25% or less, we'll have to go back and really take a look at our classroom sizes and numbers with desks and start to see, you know, whether or not this will work in a hybrid in all of the classrooms that we need it to work in. The other thing that we can do is also look at creative use of space. We have some large spaces. If we have a building which has a large cafeteria that's not used for anything else, then it can be used for instruction if students are being delivered food in their classrooms. So again, it's sort of a pod model. So the question becomes, we have to get a little bit more creative and use spaces differently depending on where that percentage of kids who are fully remote falls. So we have to literally do it building by building, which is why we need that first estimate ASAP, and then ask people to make a commitment not too long after that. So when they make the commitment, it will be for a period of time, and the most likely periods of times that we've been discussing has been a grading period. So in elementary, that would be a trimester. At high school, it would be a semester. Otherwise, you're flipping models. And if we start flipping from one model to another, if it's hybrid and you're trying to go back to everybody in, the classes don't merge. They don't align. So that's why the commitment for fully online would have to be, for example, a full semester at the high school, unless we can bring everybody back in all at once. Or if we have a situation where everybody goes remote because the situation blows up.
So when will parents know?
I'm sorry?
So when will parents know what they're doing?
It will be at I assume, the next board meeting when we'll present a plan. And then it's subject to what's happening and in the community, and what the COVID rate is, and whether we can open up with the model that we're proposing. I really believe we have a very good shot of opening this up the way we're talking about it. It's safe, it's somewhat conservative, but certainly there are other schools taking far more conservative approaches.
And our next meeting's next week, right? Is that right?
Right, next Thursday.
Okay.
We should have much more information once these parent surveys go out as to and I think it's a little unclear to people. We're surveying the parents to see what their plan is. Once we have that data, my understanding is then we'll start to formulate that plan and then have people commit in a second survey or handout or something that they need to sign on to commit. Thank you. I'm going to go with Brian now because he hasn't had a chance, and then Kristen if she wants to add in, because we're hitting our 9:15 time limit here. And we do need to take a vote on the start date because parents need to know that. So Brian, go ahead.
That was my only question, Kim. So are we going to take a vote on the start date? That was my only question. Because everything else is going to be at next week's meeting. That's what I'm hearing after we get surveys back about students and staff. So
right, we'll have a better idea. So okay, yes, we are going to take that vote. I'm going to let Jenna go.
I would just like to say that when Dr. Cochran was talking about how high school administrators watched as their students drifted away, I noticed this too. Some of my friends that were the most academically gifted kids in school struggled so deeply with mental health issues, being online and having such an intense change in their life that if we do a hybrid model or a fully remote model, I would love to see an outreach to students, especially in middle school and high school, but also elementary and pre-K and kindergarten kids have social and mental and emotional issues that they'll have to deal with, but particularly middle school and high school, a mental health outreach program for them, because I think that if there's any remote learning whatsoever, the kids are going to be home and they're still going to be struggling, and we still risk the most academically gifted students drifting away because of mental health. So I would just love to see something happen for my friends and for people that I've never even met before that I watched and have seen come out to me expressing serious concerns for their mental health.
Thank you, Jen. And in fact, we've had a lot of conversations about that. And one of the issues that happened in the spring was attendance wasn't being taken. And it wasn't just here, it was in most places. It was the odd district that actually took attendance. So one of the things that will be coming at the next board meeting is a change in the attendance policy, which there's nothing in the attendance policy that says how you take attendance when the situation is in remote learning. And so I've crafted some language that basically says in remote learning, it's similar to a blizzard bag. If a student makes an attempt and it is trying, they were present that day. If they do no work, they were absent. And so it'll be teacher basically judgment about whether students are showing up for synchronous sessions, are they attempting work, are they successfully completing work, and they'll be able to give full attendance or half-day attendance or zero attendance. And by recording that in the SIS the way we need to, we'll be able to identify earlier and more accurately those students who are not engaging and who are in risk of doing exactly what Jenna said, basically wandering away from school and being to some extent disassociated. So by enforcing what we're supposed to do legally anyway, which is take attendance, we'll be able to give guidance information about what students are not showing up, outreach to parents. What is this? What is the situation? How can we help? We do have an SRO. Some school districts have, oh, sorry, not SROs, but I'm sorry?
Truant.
No, not truant officers, outreach people. Shoot, it's a community term more than other. Not in DCYF, but somebody who is, help me, Sandy, I'm
Social
the
worker?
name.
Social worker?
Yes, thank you. So Barnstead actually went from a part-time to a full-time social worker for 480 kids. So social workers would be the interim steps. You've got guidance, then you go social worker, then DCYF. As you get deeper into, there are more issues to address here. And Sandy, you should have helped me out sooner on that one, so we'll have to talk.
Sorry about that.
But that matrix of support that Jenna spoke to so eloquently is one of the things that we're really talking about. And people have really come to talk about how important that social emotional piece and the connection piece is in a kid's education, even when we're back normally. So, Jenna, thank you.
Yes, thank you. Okay, I think, so I would like to move on to the next portion of the meeting. So I'm going to be looking for a motion to change the school calendar to have a September 8th start date.
So made.
Sean makes the motion.
Second.
Kristen seconds. Pat, can you take the vote, please?
Mr. Boyle,
Yes.
Dr. Farah,
Yes.
Mrs. Kishka,
I want to say that I don't like us changing, but because September 8th is the possibility of in-person, yes.
Ms. Lowe's,
Yes.
Mr. O'Neill,
Yes.
Mrs. Savage,
Yes.
Mrs. Silva,
Yes, after Labor Day sounds great.
Okay, thank you. So again, thank you for that. We will, board members, if you have questions
Kim,
regarding the
just a
plan,
quick
please send.
question here. Just so I understand, and so all the community, because I think some of there was ambiguity with you know, Mr. Cochran talking about this. I just want to make sure. Is there 3 different plans that a family could pick from? Would be one is 100% remote. The other one would be the cohort where you're in 3 days, where 2 days off and then remote for the other 2 days. And then the third option is 100% in class. Is that a true statement?
No, 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 no. The only way you'd have 100% in class, Sean, is if we have a small enough number of students that want to be in person, that we could maintain the CDC guidelines. So you'd be looking at probably close to 40% of our students would say, I want 100% remote in order to meet that. So there's really 2 options. We could not, at this point, go back 100%. We don't have the physical space to do that.
So we're only have the best that we have to offer is 2 days of 5 currently on the table for in the classrooms. That's
correct.
Okay.
And Dr. Farah did the math on this in terms of it. You're either got these people who are fully remote, and then the rest of them are either hybrid or all in. So really, the board will make a decision based on a recommendation if and when we move. Let's say we start in hybrid, and then the situation evolves in a positive direction, and we recommend to the board that we move to the hybrid students are now all back to school. And so the board is going to make a decision for the students who are coming back to school, whether that's all in or whether it's a hybrid. And then the people who don't want to have their children back in school are that separate group. But we would never have all 3 happening at the same time. It would be not schedulable.
One of the,
I think I just made that word up.
It's one or the other right now, Sean. Either you're in for the hybrid or you're home remote right now. Those are your choices.
And if the situation improved, you would be all in or
But
remote.
that is later on, once everything comes back to see where we are. So you have right now 2 choices. That's it.
I'll wait for my comments next week then.
No, coming away, but there's no room. That's the problem. That's the issue, is that there's no room for these kids.
Okay.
Move on.
Moving on. So the next item on the agenda is COVID-related projected costs. Sorry. So I'm not sure who is going to take the lead on that one. Hold on, I should know. Jeff Dowd is going to take the lead here. Thank you.
Thank you, Kim. So as we get into looking at our models, we have had some increase in costs. As you're aware, some of them are technology related. Really, a bulk of what it is that we're looking at right now is going to be strongly dependent on what model we end up at. And we're going through and reviewing now what those costs are going to be, a physical facilities preparation perspective, transportation perspective, in order to really get a final assessment of what those costs are. We did approve some additional purchases of technology equipment, programs, and that sort of thing, which you're aware of. And depending on how much or how often or how many of our staff are going to be back in the building, that will drive or have an impact on driving our PPE costs in the building, as well as how many of our students will be back in the building. And I just can't stress how important the survey is that's coming out. Again, this is really a non-binding survey, but it will really help the district identify where our families are, where our students are in terms of their back to school situation. And if we end up with a surprising number of families who are remote, I think that will drive a lot of the cogs in the processes and the systems that we're going to be putting in place, and what that overall experience may be for the students who are either hybrid or whatever that turns out to be. So I really can't stress enough how important it is knowing what the district's direction is, knowing, having a general idea what our plan is going to look like. Again, for our community members, those surveys are going to be very important for us to be able to gather that data to move on and be able to do the preparation we need to get a full accumulation of those costs as well. So we've looked at costs for PPE, which could enter the several $100,000 range, depending on what our populations in the schools would be. We know that our costs for remote learning have increased probably close to 175, 200,000. Our transportation costs right now, we don't know where that's going to be. I wouldn't anticipate that we would necessarily have to be running additional buses, but if we have to extend the days of the buses, the runs of the buses that we have due to capacity, that could be a cost factor as well. But again, that all depends on what our community is looking like, what our parents are looking at for their students. So I think that when we have a better idea of what that situation is going to look like, we'll really be able to get a full summary of what those costs are. I do have some updates, and I think, Sean, you're looking for some updates on our grants. I think that's not quite next on the agenda, but it might be a little bit further down. I can address how we'll be able to pay for some of those costs. I'm going to share out.
Okay, so you're not looking for action right now on this item. You're just giving us a heads up that there are COVID-related expenses that we may need to take into consideration and make some budget line adjustments in order to compensate for those, correct?
That's right.
Okay, great. Dr. Cochran has a question. You're muted.
You're on mute.
I said my wife wishes she had that button.
We don't do that.
However, I did just see a bing about 10 minutes ago, and she's working next door, and I talked loud, so she texted social worker to me.
Good to know.
One of the things
Brian,
that some districts are doing is what I'm referring to as staffing up a little bit. So we know cleaning is going to be an issue. If we can take some people who are part-time custodial staff and put them full-time, it may be cheaper than all the overtime we would have to pay. In Barnstead, we have 2 half-time interventionists, so we just put full-time. We just took money out of a fund and said, we're going to need it. Would it be nice for the high school and the middle school to have 1 or 2 full-time subs for the entire year? Well, if you look at it, we probably need at least 1 sub a day, 93, 95% of the days of the year. Do you top them up and you try to make sure we have that capacity in the building for when a teacher goes out? So that's one of the things that we've floated in terms of a cost. It's a little proactive, but quite honestly, we know if you look at the attendance rates in a normal year, that we average more than 1 sub a day in a building, in a large building. So do we try to be a little proactive in that regard? That's one of the things that I've thrown out there in terms of a potential cost. The cost isn't actually all that different, but it would mean engaging in putting somebody on a contract.
So
something to think about maybe for next board meeting.
And bear in mind, we've had a need for subs in the past, and the problem that we have is that we've considered making a position a sub float position. That's adding a position that would be up to the board, really. We can bring in temporary sub help, but I think that in a year like this, if we did have up to 1 sub float per building, we probably would be in okay shape. But that would be a position you'd be talking about adding 8 or 9 positions, which would be really substitute positions, but they would still be positions. So food for thought.
Okay. Just one thing on the survey that's going out to parents, I would suggest that one of the robocalls goes out with that to stress the importance of returning that survey, other than just an email. All right.
We talked about sending out a school messenger to all parents.
Great.
And let them know.
Okay, so moving on, Jeff, we're to end of year's financial, which moves us into the fund balance retention.
That's right. Yeah. So let me share out what I have on that. So you should have in front of you a copy, and I think I've been able to share out the year-end summary, the preliminary year-end summary. It's a little bit tricky to look at our entire district. Usually we're looking at things through the 100 fund light. So I think it's helpful to be able to bring in a little bit more in terms of our funds and tying them all together. So you can see our revenue amongst all of our funds, our expenditures amongst all of our funds. You'll see that our expenditures exceed our revenues. Not to worry, we do have a beginning fund balance from last year that was rolled forward. And so when you take all of that fund balance and you take our current year revenues, subtract out our expenditures, you get a better idea where our district is. We did roll forward some encumbrances last year, which we want to reduce out. And we have some expenditures that we're going to be applying this year, about $758,000, which we would remove before we get to our spendable fund balance, which is, I would at this point peg it $1,941,907. This is the spendable portion of it. We did have fund balance retention from last year of $500,000, which would be released unless renewed. And that's not spendable, but that's still on our books. So that's an amount last year that we took from the unencumbered fund balance, and we did not return it to the towns. We did not apply it to the town's bills for the school district. So the total unencumbered fund balance available for the 19 fund balance retention would be $2,441,907. I've included the definition of the fund balance retained that the DRA puts out relating to our statutes. Essentially 2.5% of the current fiscal year's net assessment could be used for that purpose. Fund balance retained is an amount like that $500,000 we have currently. Again, that'll expire unless renewed. That fund balance retained can really only be used in the event that really we're out of budget, we're out of money, if you will, and we would have to apply typically to the DOE to allow for that money to be used. So it's nothing that we could budget for, but it is a good thing to have on hand. We obviously did not need that this year, even in light of the COVID crisis. I think the best way to describe it has been described as having actually had application in the state. If a school should have let's say a roof cave in due to a heavy snow load. So, and I don't want to get into the situations of horribles here, but that's probably a situation that you would probably get into your fund balance retention to relocate the whole entire school. Although you may have some insurance coverage, you may have some costs that need to be addressed immediately, and it's good to have that there. So before we get into the fund balance,
Kim, what is the date we have to do this by? What
next meeting.
I'm sorry?
Next meeting is fine.
Well, I'm asking this because do we even have the June financials up yet, Jeff?
I have not, as of yet, posted them. We're, just as we're going through and closing the books, I like to make sure that all of our accounts are final before doing that.
But Kim, I'd like to push this off until next week. I want to see those financials. I don't feel comfortable. I want to see exactly what was spent where on those financials so that we may be prepared for what's coming down the road. I don't see how we can do that right now.
Oh, that's fine. And I think that it's good to be thinking about generally. I think one thing to keep in mind though is that when you look at those financials, to the extent that we have encumbrances, that's just a reservation of fund balance. That doesn't show up as an actual in the expenditure line in the current year, Sheila. So when we look at for example, what we spent in facilities, if we have a portion of that encumbrance line that's in facilities, you won't see that expense being captured in the June financials. It's really just a reservation on our fund balance. It would be helpful to see.
Is, Jeff, is that we had so many things that we got with COVID, that we had extra expenses. We had, certain lines were going, fluctuating constantly. I want to see where it landed. That's what I'm looking for. I want to see what the end result was, where it landed, where we, what the funding's going to be, and I just.
Bill, point taken. Why don't we'll defer this.
Well, do we need to keep more than 500, Kim? That's what I'm trying to get at. We have to make a really good educated decision here. And I don't have the rest of it.
Okay, yeah, no, Jeff, can you have the end of years for the next meeting?
I can, yeah. I'll post them. I'll take them we have, and I'll post them, make sure we're good. And Sheila, to your point, by the way, we did experience additional costs in some areas, but I think it's equally important to remember and take a look at where we've had cost savings. So, for example, we had about a little over 400,000 in favorable cost savings for transportation. Well, we may not have that this year. If we're going,
but we also had a hit of 200 in food. So that's what I'm saying. I want to see where it landed. That's all.
Yep, that's fair. And it's also a good consideration. I know that the towns aren't always in great shape from a tax collection perspective either. And so it's good to keep in mind what we have available, to make available to help the towns reduce their burden on the school tax bill or our assessment bill. So I think it is good. I think that there's two sides to that, both what we may need as a district, as a fund balance protection, and what we see the towns needing is a little bit of relief on the other end. So we've got two fair considerations on that.
I agree wholeheartedly.
Yep. So I've got the calculation there for you as to what the max is. And I will share with you that we have had we had some cost savings in transportation as we had anticipated. We did have an additional amount in revenue that came in for Medicaid that was about over 300,000 more than what we anticipated. Some of that, we've really been able to attribute to a prior year, and I may end up asking for a prior period adjustment, but that really doesn't impact the bottom line income, the bottom line unencumbered fund balance, because it would just roll forward. These are good considerations. You won't see those. Some of the expenditures that we've incurred, we did end up coming in favorable, I am happy to report, on the middle school rooftop units. We were looking at, I think, 164 or budgeted, and bids came in like 80. So we've had some cost savings in those as well. You won't see those in the financials, but I share them. So
okay.
If there are any other questions here, I can address them. Otherwise, yeah, we'll post them and see how they look, and any questions can be addressed then. So.
All right, that'd be great. Thank you.
Thank you.
So
and then moving on to the grants. I'm sorry, did I miss somebody's?
Oh, no. Before we move on to grants, I did just want to take a quick opportunity, because I do that at this time of the year, to remind our towns that you can be looking into your impact fees and take whatever actions you need. I'll be looking for that as we get into final rate setting. So just giving heads up on that a little early this year as a reminder. So.
Okay.
Thanks, Jeff. I'll put that on the agenda.
Sean, I don't think you've ever been, you guys are never the ones. You've never been late, I don't think, so.
Well, I'm meeting with Sandown on the 24th of August, so I'll add that to my list.
I'll tell you, it is something that creeps up on us, and the problem is that by the time, we realize that it's not done on the part of the towns, it's summer, everyone's not meeting necessarily on a consistent basis, so. Moving on to the grants, the question had been asked as to what we've really been looking at for grants related to COVID. And I can tell you the grants that I've laid out here. We have the CARES Act ESSER Fund grant, which is $124,010, federally funded. That's allocated to us based on the Title I allocations. Our funding will allow technology resources an acquisition to enhance that in-class and those remote learning options. So it'll help reduce the burden this year, which will give us a little bit of room in this year's budget should we need to redeploy assets for COVID or in COVID response. Those funds would be available to transfer. Remote learning is $15,000. That's federally funded, part of our IDEA. That funding at Timberlane is being utilized to provide COVID makeup services for special education students, demonstrating skill regression. And that's a nice bit that we can use to provide services off-site to address that need, which we would otherwise be responsible for picking up. And we've got the remote learning food service. I'll quote a grant, $67,512. That's both federally and state funded. That's an extension of existing programs, but really it benefits both at a federal level and a state level from waivers that were issued from the USDA to the DOE, which we were able to benefit from. So you're talking a little over 200,000 in direct so far. Based on what I'm picking up and what I'm hearing, I am anticipating that there will be some additional grant funding coming through. I don't know what it's going to look like. I don't know what it'll cover, but the federal government really has shown flexibility up until now in being able to meet the needs that we're experiencing. Of course, I'd like to have more assistance meeting those needs, but they've been much more responsive than I had expected. And even at a local and state level, we've actually benefited. And you'll see my note at the bottom. Those are the grants that we have that I can say, yep, those would really be specific COVID related. But we have other programs that we've been able to benefit from with some extensions on rules and that sort of thing. And an example is the inclusion of special education transportation costs in our special education formula. Based on how from March on when these are costs that typically wouldn't be included. But I understand that those will be included in our formula. So it's nice to see that there's even flexibility at that level so that we're not losing out on any aid that we'd otherwise be entitled to. And as aid continues to be available, continue to look and search, and whether it's a $15,000 grant, 124, whatever it is, we'll look after and see if we can get those resources for the district and get them deployed. A little over 206,000, I believe, altogether so far.
Okay, thank you. Sheila?
Jeff, have you heard anything more from the state as far as the additional money that we're supposed to be receiving? I think it was 2021, correct? Remember we were laughing about the 750,000 that Sandown was supposed to be getting, and I think it was Danville getting another 200,000. Is that still on its way?
That, as far as I know, it is. That'll come right off the apportionments at the town level, though.
Okay, no, I realize that. I just want to make sure it's still on its way, though. With revenues in the state and so forth, I was a little worried about that would get reneged.
Yes, I haven't heard much about that, but I share your sentiment, Sheila, and I think that there are some concerns of ongoing revenue from the state based on the situation that they've been in. They seem to be recovering a little bit better as of late, but where their revenue is so heavily driven on meals and rooms tax.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
I was just a little worried about that. So, okay. Good. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Moving on to the administrator report, Dr. Cochran, and then the personnel report.
Given how much I've spoken already tonight, I'm willing to take a pass until next week if you folks are.
Sure. So we'll move on to the personnel report. I know this is new for you, for us, but typically the superintendent will announce the candidates, well, the nominations. We have 2 nominations and then 1 professional resignation. So normally the superintendent will say who these nominations are, then the board will vote, and then we'll vote on the resignations.
I still don't have the school board packet. That was supposed to be on its way.
Sorry, I thought I sent it to you earlier.
Yeah, it didn't come through.
I think maybe I sent it to your personal email. Okay. Sandy, do you have this?
I can quickly locate it.
I have it.
If you give me a moment.
So it's okay. I can do it. We're looking to nominate Kim Workinger is a Timberlane High School biology teacher, and Rachel Kimball for Pollard as a .5 kindergarten teacher. So we'll be looking for a motion. Sheila makes the motion.
I'll second that.
Sean seconds. Kat, could you take the roll call vote on that?
Mr. Boyle,
You're on.
Just nod your head. No.
You're muted. There you go.
Yes. Yes.
Dr. Farah,
Yes.
Mrs. Kishka,
Yes.
Ms. Lowe's,
Yes.
Mr. O'Neill,
Yes.
Mrs. Savage,
Yes.
Mrs. Silva.
Yes.
Tim, I'd like to make a motion for the resignation of Catherine O'Neill Cipriano, Access Academy interventionalist, for her resignation.
Thank you. Is there a second on that?
Second.
Okay, we have a second from Barbara. We thank Ms. Cipriano for her service to Atkinson Academy. Kat, could you take a roll call vote on that, please?
Mr. Boyle,
Yes.
Dr. Farah,
Yes.
Mrs. Kishka,
Yes.
Ms. Lowe's,
Yes.
Mr. O'Neill,
Yes.
Mrs. Savage,
Yes.
Mrs. Silva.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Are there any committee reports?
Dr. Farah, can we back up a second?
Yes.
Yes, please.
In the past weeks, we have recently also hired certain people for positions that I'd like you to announce those, please.
Oh,
or I can announce it if you'd like.
go ahead, because I don't have those.
Okay.
I have it as well, Mrs. Lowe's, I have it as well.
I have it.
Great.
July 24th, I'd like to make the announcement that we had renominations and nominations of professional teachers. I'm Michelle Trainer, Timberlane Regional Middle School, grade 6 math teacher. Rebecca McKenzie, Timberlane Middle School ELS enrichment teacher. Samuel Lyons, Timberlane Regional High School music strings teacher, has been hired. I also have one more, but I wanted to make sure that particular one got out with the strings teacher. Let's see. We also had a nomination of Jennifer, forgive me, Jennifer Hotel, I hope. Timberlane Regional Middle School, grade 6 math teacher. So I just wanted to get those announced, and especially the strings teacher, where we had such a outpouring of concern from the community. I wanted to let everybody know that there has been one obtained, and we are all set. Oh, and there was also, I believe, a chorus teacher that was hired at the PAC also in past weeks. So the music department's all set.
Thank you. Jen?
Yeah, can we get an update? The Atkinson Academy principal position was posted through July 6th, and we're well past a month since that posting closed. Where are we at with that interview process?
I don't know. We'll get an update for the next meeting. Sorry,
Yeah, was Dr. Cochran trying to say something? I think he's muted.
Is he?
No.
Oh, there you go.
I received no information on it. I will follow up on it tomorrow, and we should know more by Monday morning.
Thank you. Any other committee reports? Barbara, did you want to, didn't we have an energy
briefly,
committee?
Yes, we did. For my notes. So we had Revision Energy come and give us information about doing a power purchase agreement, and we are actively trying to get a couple other solar energy companies to give us some competitive information. And we are hoping at our next meeting to, we have an intent to put solar on one of our buildings that has a newer roof. So at our next meeting, hopefully we'll decide which building that is, and hopefully we'll have we'll start putting together request for proposal or a quotation for the warrant article.
Thank you. So briefly, with solar, if we're looking to put solar, it would require a warrant article because these purchase PPAs, as they're called, would require that we go to the voters for approval because it's really an outside person is kind of funding it. So that has to move along fairly quickly if we're going to try to move with solar onto it. We felt it might be best to just try it with one building and then move forward from there. So thank you.
And the idea there is there's no money up front. It's we would be agreeing to purchase power from somebody who invested in putting solar panels on our building.
Correct. So we'll have more on that later after we get done with the school reopening. Any other committees? Okay, thank you. So that is it. For public business, I am going to request that we enter into a non-public unless, hang on, let me move back and forth. Did anybody have anything else to add? If not, I'm going to request that somebody motion to enter non-public under 91A:3, section 2C, which is reputation. Dean has already just sent out a link to everybody, and that one includes Dr. Cochran and also Kat. Sheila, are you making that motion?
I'll make it since she's on mute.
Kristen makes it. We'll let you second it, Sheila. Hurry up.
Second.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
Good. Can you take the vote, Kat?
Already a long night.
Mr. Boyles,
Yes.
Dr. Farah,
Yes.
Mrs. Kishka,
Yes, with a 5-minute stretch break.
Ms. Lowe's,
Okay.
Yes.
Mr. O'Neill,
Yes.
Mrs. Savage.
Yes, and I'd like to say goodnight to Jenna and thank her for all her work that she and the other students are doing.
Jenna, awesome job. And by the
And
way,
all the rest of the staff.
I got a
Thank
message
you.
saying how cute you were, by the way.
Oh,
She's
thank
so
you.
adorable. Very cute.
Is there going to be any action following the non-public meeting?
No, I don't anticipate any action, so we will not, we will go off the Zoom and not return.
Can I get
Perfect.
Silva's vote before we go?
Yes.
Have a good night, Jenna. We'll see you Tuesday, I'm sure.
Thank you very much. You as well.
Thank you. Kat, did you finish the roll call?
I
You
did.
Yes, Jen.
What? Okay. Okay, so we're done with the roll call vote. So I do want to thank all the administrators that helped out and all the people that are still hanging on listening. We will go into a non-public. I do not anticipate any action as we come out of that. So I do not think that we'll be returning to this Zoom meeting. So Dean, I think it's fine to shut this down.